Tank Rawlings grabbed the Muslim by the throat and slammed his face down toward the greasy pork on the metal tray. "Open your mouth," he snarled, his massive fingers digging into flesh hard enough to leave bruises. "Swallow it or I'll break every bone in your face." The cafeteria erupted in cruel laughter. 300 inmates watched. 12 guards pretended to see nothing. Cell phones recorded from every angle, but the quiet man in Tank's grip did not struggle, did not beg, did not even blink. His fingers simply curled around the edge of the table with a stillness that seemed wrong, impossible. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried no fear at all. "Remove your hand," Khalid Morrison said softly, "or I will remove it for you." Tank Rawlings laughed. He had broken 100 men in this prison. This one would be no different, except Tank had made a mistake that would cost him everything. The quiet Muslim accountant he was trying to humiliate had spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL. Team 6, the most lethal special operations unit in American military history. Stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. Hit subscribe right now and comment below which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels around the world. Now let me tell you how we got here. Khalid Morrison knew he was going to prison 3 seconds before the FBI agents reached his office door. He had been reviewing tax documents for a client when movement in the parking lot caught his attention. 2 black SUVs, 4 men in dark suits walking with purpose toward his building. The way they moved told him everything. Coordinated, confident, federal. Khalid closed his laptop slowly and said a quiet prayer. The door opened without a knock. Khalid Morrison. The lead agent was a woman in her 40s, with eyes that had seen too many liars to be fooled by any more. "FBI, we have a warrant for your arrest." "I understand." Khalid stood and placed his hands on the desk where they could be seen clearly. "May I ask what charges, but tax evasion, money laundering, fraud?" She pulled out handcuffs that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. 3 years of investigation, Mr. Morrison. We know everything." Khalid nodded slowly. "My lawyer's card is in the top drawer. Her name is Rebecca Chen." "You seem calm for a man whose life just ended." Khalid almost smiled at that. His life had almost ended many times, in places this FBI agent would never see and could never imagine. A federal arrest was inconvenient. It was not the worst thing that had ever happened to him. "I made mistakes," he said simply. "Now I face the consequences. That's how it works." "Isn't?" The agent studied him with obvious curiosity as her partner secured the handcuffs around his wrist. Most white-collar criminals cried, threatened, demanded lawyers, or tried to negotiate. This man simply accepted his fate like he had been expecting it. "You're different," she said. "I've been told that before." They let him out of his own accounting firm in handcuffs while his employees watched in stunned silence. His secretary, Maria, was crying. His partner, James, looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. Khalid met none of their eyes. He simply walked forward one step at a time toward whatever came next. The FBI agent was right about one thing. Khalid Morrison was different. But she had no idea how different. The courtroom was packed on the day of sentencing. Khalid's wife, Amira, sat in the front row with their 3 children beside her. Maya, 14 years old, stared at her father with confusion and pain that broke his heart. Omar, 11, kept his eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to look at anyone. Little Layla, only 7, did not understand why Baba was standing in front of a judge, but she knew something was terribly wrong. "Mr. Morrison?" Judge Patricia Whitfield peered down at him over reading glasses that made her look even more severe than her reputation suggested. "You have pleaded guilty to 3 counts of tax evasion, 2 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of financial fraud. Do you have anything to say before I pronounce sentence?" Khalid stood straight, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that was more military than civilian. His lawyer, Rebecca, had told him to show remorse, to beg for leniency, to mention his family and his community service and his clean record. He had chosen a different path. "Your Honor, I broke the law. I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I did it anyway. I convinced myself that the reasons justified the actions, but they did not. I accept full responsibility for my choices, and I accept whatever punishment this court decides is appropriate." Judge Whitfield's eyebrows rose slightly. In 30 years on the bench, she had heard thousands of defendants speak before sentencing. Almost all of them made excuses. Almost all of them blamed circumstances, or other people, or temporary insanity. This man was simply admitting guilt and accepting consequences. "Your military record is sealed," she said, glancing at papers in front of her. 12 years of service with an honorable discharge. multiple commendations that I am not permitted to see the details of. Your lawyer has argued that this should be considered in mitigation. My service has nothing to do with my crimes, Your Honor. I was a good soldier. I was not a good accountant. That may be the most honest thing any defendant has ever said in my courtroom. Judge Whitfield removed her glasses and set them aside. Mr. Morrison, your crimes caused significant financial harm to the federal government and by extension to every American taxpayer. The fact that you intended to use the money for your children's education does not excuse the theft. It simply makes it more tragic. Amira's hand found their daughter's and squeezed tight. However, Sramikum, the judge continued, I am also required to consider the totality of circumstances, your complete lack of prior criminal history, your genuine acceptance of responsibility, your service to this country, whatever form that service took. She paused, and Khalid felt the weight of 300 eyes pressing against his back. I am sentencing you to 8 years in federal custody to be served at a facility determined by the Bureau of Prisons. You will be eligible for parole after serving 60% of your sentence. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Then this court is adjourned. The bang of the gavel echoed through the room like a gunshot. Khalid turned to look at his family one last time before the marshals led him away. Amira was crying silently, her hijab framing a face that had never looked more beautiful or more broken. Maya had buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Omar still would not look up. But Layla, little Layla, was looking directly at her father with eyes full of questions she did not know how to ask. Khalid smiled at her. He smiled because he needed her to know that Baba was okay, that Baba would survive this, that Baba would come home. Then the door closed between them, and Khalid Morrison began the longest walk of his life. The transport bus to Stonegate Federal Prison carried 18 inmates through Arizona desert that stretched to every horizon like an ocean of sand and stone. Khalid sat in the back row with his wrists and ankles shackled to a chain that connected to a bolt in the floor. The restraints were uncomfortable but not unbearable. He had worn worse in survival training. He had been in tighter spaces during submarine insertions. He had faced more hostile environments in the mountains of Afghanistan. You look like you're on vacation. The voice came from the inmate seated across the aisle, a heavily tattooed man in his 30s with a shaved head and eyes that never stopped moving. Prison had already hardened him into something predatory, and he was sizing Khalid up the way a wolf sizes up a deer. Just staying calm, Khalid replied. Calm. The man laughed without humor. Brother, where we're going, calm gets you killed. You know what Stonegate is? It's where they put the animals so they can't control anywhere else. The murderers, the gang leaders, the psychos who killed their whole families and smiled for the mugshot. And you. Armed robbery, 3 strikes, life without parole. The man shrugged like he was discussing the weather. I got nothing to lose anymore, which makes me dangerous. What about you? What's a nice clean-cut Muslim doing on a bus to hell? Tax evasion? The man stared at him for a long moment, then burst out laughing. Several other inmates turned to look at the commotion. Tax evasion. They sent you to Stonegate for tax evasion. Oh, brother, somebody up there hates you. You're going to get eaten alive. Those animals see a soft target like you, they're going to pass you around like currency. Khalid met the man's eyes with perfect steadiness. I appreciate the warning. Warning won't save you. Nothing will save you. Best thing you can do is find somebody to protect you. Pay tribute, do what they say, maybe you survive long enough to get transferred somewhere easier. The man leaned closer, his voice dropping. The man who runs the block you're going to, they call him Tank. Big white boy with Nazi tattoos and a crew that does whatever he says. You see him, you get on your knees and beg. That's your only play. I don't kneel to anyone except God. The words hung in the recycled air of the transport bus. Something in Khalid's voice made the tattooed man lean back in his seat, his predatory confidence suddenly uncertain. The Muslim accountant across from him did not look dangerous. He did not carry himself with the aggressive posturing of someone who had survived violence. He just sat there calm and still, like a man who had already made peace with whatever was coming. You're either crazy or stupid, the man said finally. Maybe both. Maybe, Khalid agreed. We'll see. The bus rolled on through the desert, carrying its cargo of broken men toward a place where hope went to die. The intake process at Stonegate was designed to destroy the human spirit. Khalid stood in line with 17 other new arrivals stripped naked under fluorescent lights that hummed with a frequency that seemed designed to induce headaches. Guards in tactical gear watched them with expressions that ranged from boredom to barely concealed contempt. Bend over, spread your cheeks. The cavity search was thorough and deliberately humiliating. Khalid submitted to it without reaction, his mind retreating to a quiet place he had discovered during his years in the SEALs. The body could endure almost anything if the mind remained detached. Pain was temporary, humiliation was a choice. Only death was permanent. Inmate 47291, a guard tossed an orange jumpsuit at Khalid's chest. You're assigned to Block D, Cell 47. Your property will be held until release. My Quran? Khalid said. May I keep it with me? The guard looked at him with something that might have been surprise. Most new inmates asked about phone privileges or commissary access or protection from other prisoners. This one wanted a religious book. Religious materials are permitted. You can collect it from processing after you're dressed. Thank you. The word seemed to confuse the guard even more. Gratitude was not common in this place. Khalid dressed in the orange jumpsuit that would be his uniform for the next 8 years and collected his Quran from a processing officer who handled it with obvious distaste. The book was worn from years of use. Its pages soft from countless readings, its binding held together with tape that his daughter Maya had applied when she was only 6 years old. He pressed it to his chest for just a moment. Then he walked into hell. Block D announced itself through sound before sight. The noise hit Khalid like a physical force as the security gate clanged shut behind him. Hundreds of voices shouting, arguing, laughing, threatening. Metal clanking against metal. A television blaring somewhere in the distance. The constant underlying tension of men packed too tightly together with no outlet for their rage. And beneath it all, a watching silence. Eyes tracked Khalid as he walked down the main corridor toward his assigned cell. He felt them cataloging him, assessing him, calculating his worth and his weakness. Fresh meat, new arrival, target. You're in 47, a guard pointed toward a cell at the end of the row without bothering to escort him. Your cellie's already there, try not to kill each other. The cell was 7 feet by 9 feet, containing 2 metal bunks, a steel toilet, and a sink with water that ran brown before clearing. A young white man in his early 20s sat on the lower bunk, his eyes going wide as Khalid entered. Oh God. The young man scrambled to his feet, pressing himself against the far wall. Look, whatever you want, just don't hurt me, okay? I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to do my time and go home. Khalid set his small bag of belongings on the upper bunk. I'm not going to hurt you. That's what everyone says right before they hurt you. My name is Khalid. What's yours? The question seemed to catch the young man off guard. He blinked several times, processing the unexpected normalcy of the exchange. Kevin Wright. Armed robbery, but I didn't actually have a gun. It was a fake. The judge didn't care. He swallowed hard. I've got 18 months left. 18 months. I just need to survive 18 more months. Then we'll survive together. Khalid extended his hand. Peace be upon you, Kevin. Kevin stared at the offered hand like it might be a trick. Then slowly he reached out and shook it. You're weird, Kevin said. I don't mean that as an insult. I just mean, you're not like anyone I've met in here. I've been told that before. By the way, Kevin's voice dropped to a whisper, this block belongs to a guy named Tank Rawlings. You need to know about him before he comes looking for you. Khalid sat on the lower edge of his bunk, giving Kevin his full attention. Tell me. Tank runs everything in Block D. Everything. The drugs, the phones, the protection rackets. He's got like 20 guys who do whatever he says, and the guards don't touch him because he keeps things organized. Violent, but organized. Less paperwork for them. What does he want from new inmates? Tribute, money from your commissary, phone time, sometimes. Kevin hesitated, his face going pale. Sometimes he wants other things. Depends on how much he decides to mess with you. Some guys he leaves alone if they pay up. Others he breaks just because he can. And if someone refuses to pay, Kevin laughed bitterly. Nobody refuses. The last guy who tried ended up in the infirmary for 6 weeks. Before that, someone ended up in the morgue. Made to look like a suicide, but everyone knew. Everyone always knows. Khalid absorbed this information with no visible reaction. When will he come? Could be today, could be tomorrow. Tank likes to watch new fish for a while, figure out their weakness. Then he moves. Kevin leaned closer, his eyes pleading. Look, man, I don't know who you are or what you did, but you seem like a decent person. So I'm telling you straight, when Tank comes, just give him what he wants. Pride isn't worth dying for. Not in here. Khalid reached for his Quran and opened it to a marked page. Pride has nothing to do with it, Kevin. Faith does. Faith won't stop a shiv in the shower. Perhaps not. Khalid began to read silently, the conversation apparently over. But faith will decide what kind of man I am when that shiv comes. Kevin stared at his strange new cellmate for a long moment, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew about survival in this place. The quiet Muslim wasn't acting like a victim. He wasn't acting like a predator either. He was acting like someone who had already seen the worst the world had to offer and had come out the other side with his soul intact. Kevin had been in Stonegate for 14 months. He had seen dozens of men break under Tank's pressure. He had seen tough guys reduced to whimpering servants. He had seen proud men become hollow shells. Something told him Khalid Morrison would be different. He just hoped the difference wouldn't get them both killed. Tank Rawlings was eating breakfast when Snake brought him the news. "Fresh fish in Block D, yep," Snake reported, sliding into the seat across from his boss. "Muslim, 42 years old, tax evasion." Tank looked up from his tray with mild interest. "Tax evasion, they sent a tax cheat to Stonegate. Overcrowding at the minimum security facilities. They're shipping white-collar guys wherever there's space." Snake pulled out a folded paper with notes he had bribed a guard to provide. "Name is Khalid Morrison, from Detroit. Wife and 3 kids. No gang affiliations, no violent history, no known connections." "What about the Muslim thing?" "Practicing. Prays 5 times a day, carries a Quran everywhere, doesn't eat pork or drink alcohol." Snake grinned, showing teeth stained yellow from decades of prison coffee. "In other words, perfect." Tank leaned back in his seat, a smile spreading across his face. He was 44 years old, though 23 years in prison had aged him well beyond that. He stood 6'5", 280 pounds of muscle and malice wrapped in skin covered with tattoos that told the story of his journey from small-town racist to prison kingpin. Swastikas competed for space with gang symbols that shouldn't have existed together. But Tank had built bridges through violence that transcended the usual tribal divisions. Everyone feared him. That was the point. "A practicing Muslim?" Tank repeated, savoring the words. "I haven't had a good Muslim to play with since that imam we broke back in 2019. What was his name?" "Fareed something. He ended up transferring to protective custody after 2 months. Cried every night before he left." "Good times." Tank cracked his knuckles with a sound like small bones breaking. "I want to meet this Khalid Morrison, see what kind of man we're dealing with before I decide how to break him." "Should I bring him to you?" "No, I want to observe first. Watch how he moves, who he talks to, what his patterns are. The quiet ones sometimes have surprises." Snake nodded and slid out of the seat to carry out his orders. Tank finished his breakfast slowly, his mind already working through the possibilities. Fresh Muslims were rare entertainment in Stonegate. The last few had broken easily, sobbing and abandoning their faith within weeks under his systematic pressure. This accountant from Detroit would probably be the same, but something in Snake's report nagged at him. No violent history, no known connections. Usually those words described victims. Easy targets. Men who would fold at the first sign of real pressure. So why did Tank feel a small whisper of caution in the back of his mind? He dismissed the feeling and went about his day. It was probably nothing. 2 weeks passed. Tank watched. His crew watched. They documented Khalid Morrison's every move with the patience of predators, stalking prey that didn't know it was being hunted. The Muslim's routine never varied. He woke before morning count, performed prayers facing east, made his bunk with corners so precise they could have passed military inspection, and moved through his days with a calm efficiency that seemed almost robotic. He ate alone at the same table in the cafeteria, always table 9, always in the corner where he could see the entire room while keeping his back protected by the wall. He spent recreation time in the library reading books that Tank's crew couldn't even pronounce. Philosophy, history, military strategy from generals whose names sounded like they belonged in ancient times. He spoke to almost no one except his cellmate Kevin, and those conversations were always quiet, brief, and impossible to overhear. "He's weird," Snake reported after the second week. "Doesn't do anything wrong, doesn't cause any trouble, doesn't even look scared, just goes through his routine like nothing matters except whatever's inside his head." "Everyone's scared of something," Tank replied. "We just haven't found his button yet." The button revealed itself the next day. Tank positioned his crew near the phone bank during the afternoon calling hours. It was a power move he used regularly, forcing every inmate to walk past his men in order to contact the outside world. A reminder that nothing in Block D happened without Tank's awareness. Khalid joined the line at the end, waiting patiently behind a dozen other inmates who made their calls, quickly eager to get away from Tank's looming presence. "Hey, Towelhead," one of Tank's men called out as Khalid waited. "You calling your terrorist buddies, maybe planning another 9/11? Khalid showed no reaction. I heard his wife found a real man while he's in here. You know how they do it, right, Stone? The cheating wife, unless she's cheating with a white guy, then it's okay. More laughter from Tank's crew. Still no reaction from Khalid, but Tank, watching from his position of dominance, noticed something change when the mention of his wife came up. A slight tightening around the Muslim's eyes. A barely perceptible shift in his breathing. Microscopic, tells that most people would never catch. Tank smiled. He had found the button. When Khalid's turn came, Tank stepped directly into his path, blocking access to the phone with his massive frame. Where do you think you're going? To call my family. Khalid's voice was calm even. It's my scheduled time. Your scheduled time? Tank laughed and looked at his crew. You hear that the terrorist thinks he has a schedule in my house. Khalid said nothing. He simply waited. This non-reaction irritated Tank more than defiance would have. He was accustomed to fear. He was accustomed to anger. He knew how to handle both. This peaceful stillness was outside his experience. I'm talking to you. Tank stepped closer until his chest nearly touched Khalid's face. When I speak, you answer. That's called respect. Something your people don't understand. I heard you. I'm still waiting to call my family. Your family. Tank dropped his voice to a whisper only Khalid could hear. Your pretty wife. Your 3 kids. I've been thinking about them, you know. Wondering what they're doing while you're locked up in here with me. Your wife especially. She must get lonely at night. Maybe she's already found somebody to keep her warm. Something flickered in Khalid's eyes. There and gone in an instant. But Tank saw it, and he pressed harder. When you get out of here in 8 years, your kids won't remember your face. They'll call some other man daddy, and your wife... Tank grinned. She'll have forgotten you ever existed. That's what happens to men who come to my house. They lose everything. Everything. Tank shoved Khalid hard in the chest with both hands, putting his full 280 pounds behind the push. The impact should have sent the smaller man flying backward, should have knocked him to the concrete floor, should have proven once and for all who held power in this place. Khalid did not move. His feet seemed rooted to the floor. As he absorbed the force, shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, and remained standing exactly where he had been. It was like pushing against a wall. Tank's grin faltered. What the... He shoved again, harder this time, throwing everything he had into the effort. Khalid absorbed it the same way, unmoved, unshaken. His breathing hadn't even changed. Tank stepped back, genuinely confused for the first time in years. He had moved men much bigger than this accountant. He had knocked down inmates who outweighed Khalid by 50 pounds. Something was wrong with this picture. Something didn't add up. How did you do that? Balance, Khalid said simply. When your center is stable, external forces matter less. The answer made no sense to Tank, but the way Khalid delivered it made his blood run cold. There was no fear in those words, no submission, just calm certainty from a man who seemed completely unimpressed by everything Tank had done. This isn't over, Tank growled, backing away slowly. You hear me? This isn't close to over. I hear you. Khalid stepped around him and walked to the phone. Tank watched him dial with steady hands, pick up the receiver, and begin speaking softly in a language Tank didn't understand. Arabic, probably. Terrorist talk. Boss Tomi... Snake appeared at his elbow. You want us to... Not yet. Tank's voice was hoarse. I need to think. He turned and walked away, his crew falling in behind him with uncertain steps. Something had just happened that none of them understood. Their invincible leader had been physically defied by a man who looked like he should be teaching children how to read. And somehow, impossibly, that defiance had worked. Behind them, Khalid Morrison spoke into the phone with a warmth that seemed impossible for someone who had just faced down a killer. Assalamu alaikum, my love. How are the children today? The call lasted 10 minutes. Amira told him about Maya's struggles in school, about the other kids who had learned where her father was and decided to make her life miserable. She told him about Omar's anger, the fights he kept getting into the counselor who said he was expressing displaced rage at a world that had taken his father away. She told him about Layla's drawings, colorful pictures of Baba reading Quran that she wanted to mail but didn't know how. They miss you, Amira whispered at the end. I miss you. Every day feels like a year. I know, my love, I know. Khalid, I've heard things about that prison, about the gangs and the violence. Are you safe? He thought about Tank Rawlings, about the confrontation that had just ended and the war that was surely coming, about the 20 men who followed Tank's orders without question and the guards who looked the other way. I'm safe, he said. I promise. Don't lie to me. Not about this. I'm not lying. Khalid closed his eyes and let her voice wash over him like prayer. I have survived worse things than this, Amira. I will survive this too, and I will come home to you. That is the only promise that matters. I love you. I love you more than words can say. Kiss the children for me. He hung up and stood there for a moment, his hand still resting on the phone. The warmth of her voice lingered like sunlight after sunset. Then he turned and walked back to his cell. Kevin was waiting with wide eyes and barely contained panic. Everyone's talking about what happened at the phones. You pushed back against Tank Rawlings and walked away. Nobody does that. Nobody survives that. I didn't push back. I simply didn't fall down. That's the same thing too, Tank. That's the same thing. Kevin was pacing the tiny cell like a caged animal. You don't understand how this works. You made him look weak in front of his crew, in front of everyone who was watching. He can't let that stand. He's going to come for you with everything he has. Khalid sat on his bunk and opened his Quran. Then he comes. That's it. That's your response. Then he comes. Kevin stopped pacing and stared at his cellmate with something approaching despair. Do you want to die? Is that what this is? Some kind of suicide by gang leader? I want to serve my time and return to my family. Nothing more. Then why won't you just pay tribute like everyone else? Why won't you bow your head and let him feel like a big man? That's all it takes. A little submission, and he leaves you alone. Khalid looked up from his book with eyes that held no fear and no anger, only calm certainty. I bow to no one except Allah. Not to Tank Rawlings, not to any man. That is not pride, Kevin. That is faith. And faith is the only thing I have left that cannot be taken from me. Kevin opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Something in Khalid's voice had changed. The gentleness was still there, but beneath it was steel, the kind of steel that doesn't bend or break no matter how much pressure is applied. Who are you? Kevin whispered. Really, who are you? I told you, an accountant who made bad decisions. No, that's not it. Accountants don't stand up to Tank Rawlings. Accountants don't talk about faith like it's a weapon. Accountants don't have that look in their eyes like they've seen things that would break normal people. Kevin sat down on his own bunk, exhausted by his own fear. Please, I'm going to be your cellmate for the next 18 months. I think I deserve to know who I'm living with. Khalid was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, distant, like a man recounting a dream he wasn't sure was real. Before I was an accountant, I was a soldier. For 12 years, I served this country in ways that will never appear in any public record. I did things that kept American families safe. Things that I cannot speak about, not because I am ashamed, but because they are classified by law. Kevin's eyes went wide. What kind of soldier? The kind they don't talk about on the news. Khalid returned his attention to his Quran. The kind that learns to survive anything, even a prison full of men like Tank Rawlings. Kevin didn't sleep well that night. Neither did Tank. The confrontation at the phone bank had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. Tank had been running Block D for over a decade. He had faced challengers from every gang, every race, every level of violence the American prison system could produce. He had broken them all. But something about the quiet Muslim was different. It wasn't defiance. Tank had seen defiance. Defiance was anger and ego and the desperate need to prove yourself. This wasn't that. This was something else. A stillness, a centeredness, a complete lack of fear that made no sense given the circumstances. Tank lay on his bunk in the private cell his status afforded him and stared at the ceiling. Maybe he's just crazy, he muttered to himself. Some kind of religious nutjob who thinks God will protect him. But that explanation didn't satisfy. Crazy people didn't move the way Khalid moved. They didn't speak with that quiet control. They didn't absorb a full-force shove from a man twice their size without moving an inch. There was something else going on with this accountant from Detroit, something that made Tank's instincts whisper caution. He decided to test the Muslim one more time before committing to all-out war. If Khalid broke during the next confrontation, Tank would know he was dealing with an ordinary man who had simply gotten lucky. If he didn't break, Tank didn't want to think about that possibility. The library confrontation happened exactly 1 week later. Khalid had been reading Marcus Aurelius, finding comfort in the ancient emperor's words about enduring hardship with dignity. The Stoics understood something that most modern people had forgotten. External circumstances could not touch the inner self unless you permitted them to. Freedom was a state of mind, not a physical condition. When you arise in the morning, the text read, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. The words were still resonating in his mind when the library doors crashed open. Tank Rawlings stood in the entrance with 5 of his biggest crew members arranged behind him like a wall of human destruction. The message was clear. This was not a random encounter. This was planned. Deliberate. A statement. The handful of other inmates in the library immediately began moving toward the exits. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly librarian who had seen too much violence in her 20 years at this facility, retreated to her office and locked the door. She picked up her phone to call for guards, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial. "Well, well," Tank's voice echoed off the concrete walls. "Look who thinks reading books makes him special." Khalid closed his book carefully and set it aside. "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon," he says. Tank laughed, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. So polite, so civilized, like we're having tea at the country club instead of standing in a prison library. "Is there something I can help you with?" Tank crossed the distance between them in 4 heavy strides, grabbed a chair, and straddled it backward so he could lean in close. His breath washed over Khalid's face, stale and sour. "Let me explain something to you since you don't seem to understand how things work around here. This is my house. Everything in it belongs to me. The drugs, the phones, the protection, the food, the air you breathe. And when I tell someone to do something, they do it. Not because they want to, because they have no choice." Khalid met Tank's glare without flinching. "I understand your position." "Do you?" "Because it doesn't seem like you do." Tank leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Last chance, towelhead. Get on your knees and apologize for disrespecting me at the phone bank. Do it now in front of my boys, and maybe I let you walk out of this library in one piece." "I cannot do that." "You cannot, or you will not." "Both." Khalid's voice remained perfectly calm. "I bow to no one except Allah. That is not pride. That is faith. And I will not abandon my faith, not for you, not for anyone." Tank stared at him for a long moment. Then he exploded. His massive hand shot forward and grabbed Khalid's orange jumpsuit, intending to drag him across the table and demonstrate once and for all what happened to men who refused to acknowledge the natural order of things. What happened next would be whispered about in Stonegate Federal Prison for years to come. Khalid's left hand came up in a smooth arc, fingers finding a pressure point just below Tank's wrist. The technique was called nerve suppression, developed from ancient martial arts and refined through centuries of warrior tradition. Applied correctly, it could release even the strongest grip without causing permanent damage. Tank's fingers opened involuntarily. His hand fell away from Khalid's jumpsuit like it had suddenly lost the ability to function. At the same instant, Khalid's right palm struck forward with surgical precision, connecting with a cluster of nerves just below Tank's sternum. The technique was called Silent Thunder, and it required years of practice to master. Too soft and it had no effect. Too hard and it could stop a human heart. Khalid applied exactly enough force to drop the biggest man in Stonegate Federal Prison to his knees. Tank collapsed like his strings had been cut. His lungs refused to draw breath. His heart stuttered in his chest. His eyes went wide with a terror he had never felt before, not in 23 years of prison violence, not in any of the brutal confrontations that had built his reputation. He had never been helpless. He was helpless now. His crew stood frozen behind him, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Their invincible leader, the man who had ruled Block D through fear and violence for over a decade, was on his knees in front of a quiet Muslim accountant who looked like he should be reading bedtime stories to children. "I asked you respectfully to leave me alone," Khalid said, rising slowly from his seat. His voice remained calm, almost gentle, as if he were explaining something to a particularly slow student. "All I want is to serve my time in peace and return to my family. That is all I have ever wanted." Tank struggled to his feet, gasping for air, his face twisted with humiliation and rage that went beyond anything his crew had ever seen. The loss of face in front of witnesses was worse than any physical pain. Every eye in the library was on him, watching the king try to recover from being brought low. "You," Tank wheezed, pointing a shaking finger at Khalid. "You are dead. You hear me, dead." Khalid picked up his philosophy book. "I hear you. I hope you'll reconsider." He walked past Tank and his crew, past the overturned chairs and scattered books, out of the library and down the corridor toward his cell. He did not run. He did not look back. He simply walked with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his every movement since the day he arrived. Behind him, Tank Rawlings stood in the wreckage of his reputation, surrounded by crew members who looked at him with something they had never shown before. Doubt. "Boss," Snake's voice was hesitant. "What do we do?" Tank's hands were still trembling. His chest still ached from a blow that should not have been possible. Everything he thought he knew about power and violence had just been turned upside down by a man who weighed 40 pounds less than him. "Get Crusher," he said, finally his voice raw. "Tell him I'll pay double his usual rate, and get word to the boys in Block C, every soldier we can trust." "What are we doing?" Tank turned to face his right-hand man, and the look in his eyes made Snake take an involuntary step backward. "We're going to war." Word spread through Stonegate Federal Prison like wildfire in dry brush. By dinner that same evening, every inmate in every block had heard some version of what happened in the library. The stories grew with each telling. Some said the Muslim had used ancient martial arts to paralyze Tank's entire body. Others claimed he had whispered a curse that made the big man's heart stop beating for 10 full seconds. A few swore they had seen Khalid's eyes turn completely black during the confrontation, like something demonic had taken over his body. The truth was stranger than any of the rumors. Kevin was waiting in their cell when Khalid returned from the library, his face pale with terror, and something else that looked almost like awe. "Is it true?" Kevin whispered, before Khalid had even crossed the threshold. "Did you really drop Tank Rawlings with one hit?" "Two," Khalid corrected, sitting on his bunk with a tired sigh. "One to release his grip, one to take him down. 2 hits. 2 hits against the most dangerous man in this prison, and you walked away without a scratch." Kevin's voice cracked with hysteria. "Do you understand what you've done? Do you have any idea what's coming?" "I understand perfectly." "Then why are you so calm? Tank is going to kill you. He's probably planning it right now." Khalid opened his Quran and found the page he had been reading before the confrontation. "He was already planning to destroy me, Kevin. Today simply accelerated the timeline. You could have avoided this. You could have just given him what he wanted." "No." Khalid looked up with eyes that held no regret. "I could not. Some things are more important than survival." Kevin stared at him like he was looking at a man who had already died and simply hadn't realized it yet. 3 hours later, word reached Khalid through the prison grapevine that Tank had summoned Crusher from Block C. The name meant nothing to Khalid, but Kevin's reaction told him everything he needed to know. "Crusher." Kevin breathed, his face going white. "Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. Who is he? He's not human. That's the only way I can describe it. 6'7", maybe 350 pounds, and none of it is fat. He's a contract enforcer. When someone needs a problem solved permanently, they pay Crusher to solve it. He's killed at least 4 inmates that I know of, made them all look like accidents or suicides." "How much does Tank pay him?" "For a regular job, a few thousand in commissary credits. But for something like this," Kevin shook his head, "Tank will pay whatever Crusher asks. His reputation is on the line. You humiliated him in front of witnesses, and now he has to make an example that nobody will ever forget." Khalid absorbed this information with the same calm that had characterized every moment since his arrival at Stonegate. When will they come? Could be tomorrow, could be tonight. Crusher doesn't announce himself. He just appears, does what he's paid to do, and disappears. Kevin grabbed Khalid's arm with desperate strength. "Please, please, you have to do something." "Go to the guards, ask for protective custody. Tell them you'll testify against Tank. There has to be a way out of this." "Protective custody means solitary confinement. I would lose my phone privileges, my access to the library, my ability to pray with other Muslims." Khalid gently removed Kevin's hand from his arm. "I would lose everything that makes me who I am. That is not survival. That is a different kind of death." "It's better than the real kind." "Is it?" Khalid's voice was soft but certain. "I spent 12 years preparing for moments exactly like this one. I will not throw away that preparation by hiding in a hole and waiting for the danger to pass." Kevin's eyes widened. "Your military service, the thing you won't talk about. That's what you mean, isn't it? You were trained for this." "I was trained for many things." "What kind of training? Special Forces Rangers, what?" Khalid was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. Kevin was young and frightened, but he had also been honest and loyal during their weeks together. He deserved some version of the truth. "Have you ever heard of Navy SEALs?" Kevin's jaw dropped. "I served for 12 years, Khalid continued. "Most of that time was spent in a unit called DevGru. You might know it by its other name." "Team 6, Kevin whispered. "You were in SEAL Team 6. I was. The Bin Laden raid, the hostage rescues, the missions they make movies about." Kevin looked at his cellmate like he was seeing him for the first time. "That was you." "You did things like that." "I did things that I cannot discuss, Kevin. Things that are still classified. Things that I have spent the past 10 years trying to forget." Khalid closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they held a sadness that Kevin had never seen before. I left that life because I did not want to be a weapon anymore. I found Islam, found peace, found a way to be a husband and father instead of a killer. But the training never leaves you. The skills remain even when you wish they would fade. So when Tank came at you in the library, I responded the way I was trained to respond, without thinking, without choosing, pure instinct. Khalid shook his head slowly. I had hoped to never use those skills again, but some fights cannot be avoided. Kevin sat down heavily on his own bunk processing this revelation. His cellmate wasn't just a quiet Muslim accountant who had made some bad financial decisions. He was one of the most highly trained warriors the United States military had ever produced. Can you beat Crusher? Kevin asked finally. If he comes for you, can you actually win? I don't know, Khalid admitted. I have never fought anyone his size, and I am 42 years old now, not the young operator I once was. The outcome is uncertain. But you're going to fight anyway. I have no other choice. Kevin was quiet for a long time after that. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Then I'll help you. Khalid looked at him with genuine surprise. What? I said I'll help you. I don't know how. I'm not a fighter. I'm not brave. I'm just a scared kid who held up a convenience store with a fake gun because I needed money for my mom's medical bills. But you're the first person in this place who has treated me like a human being instead of a target. So if there's anything I can do, anything at all, I want to do it. Khalid studied the young man's face, searching for signs of false bravado or manipulation. He found none. Kevin Wright was terrified, but he was also sincere. Thank you, Khalid said quietly. That means more than you know. What can I do? Be my eyes and ears. Move through the prison during the day, listen to conversations, track the movements of Tank's crew. They will be planning something, and advance warning could make the difference between life and death. Kevin nodded, his fear momentarily overridden by a sense of purpose. I can do that. I'm invisible to these guys anyway. They don't see me as a threat, so they don't watch what they say around me. Good. And Kevin? Yeah. If things go badly, if I fall and don't get back up, don't try to avenge me. Just keep your head down and survive until your release date. Get out of this place and never come back. That's what I want for you. Kevin's eyes filled with tears that he quickly blinked away. You're not going to fall. You're a Navy SEAL. You've survived things that would kill normal people 100 times over. You're going to beat Crusher and Tank and whoever else they throw at you, and then you're going to go home to your family. Inshallah, Khalid replied. God willing. The next 48 hours passed in a haze of tension and waiting. Kevin moved through the prison like a ghost, invisible and forgotten, his ears capturing fragments of conversations that painted a picture of impending violence. Tank had offered Crusher $15,000 in commissary credits, far more than any previous contract. In exchange, Crusher would not only eliminate Khalid, but do it in a way that sent a message to every inmate in the facility. The Muslim's death would be painful, public, and impossible to ignore. They're bringing in more guys, Kevin reported on the evening of the second day, his voice shaking. 3 from Block C, 2 from Block B, all killers. All loyal to Tank or Crusher, or both. Khalid processed this information while continuing his evening prayers. When? Tomorrow morning, in the showers. They figure that's when you're most vulnerable, and there are blind spots in the camera coverage that the guards never bothered to fix. The showers. Khalid finished his prayer and rose to his feet. 8 men against 1. 7, Kevin corrected. Crusher counts as 2. Despite the gravity of the situation, Khalid almost smiled. Fair point. You could skip the showers tomorrow, stay in the cell, make them come to you on your terms instead of theirs. If I hide, they will simply choose a different time and place, one that might put other people in danger. Khalid shook his head. No, I will go to the showers tomorrow morning as always. I will not change my routine because of their threats. That's insane. Perhaps, but it is also tactically sound. They believe they have the element of surprise. They believe I will be unprepared and vulnerable. That belief makes them overconfident, and overconfidence creates opportunities. Kevin stared at him with a mixture of terror and wonder. You want them to attack you. I want them to attack me at a time and place of my choosing where I can control the variables. The showers tomorrow morning meet those criteria. Khalid placed a gentle hand on Kevin's shoulder. Go to the library during that time. Do not come back to the cell until you hear that it's over one way or another. I don't want to leave you alone. I won't be alone. Khalid's eyes held a certainty that seemed to transcend the physical world. I am never alone. Morning came too quickly. Khalid rose at his usual time, performed his Fajr prayer facing east, and prepared for what might be the last day of his life. He dressed in his orange jumpsuit with the same methodical care he had applied to his equipment before combat operations. He stretched muscles that hadn't been tested in serious combat for over a decade, feeling both the limitations of age and the enduring strength of training that never truly faded. Kevin watched from his bunk with eyes full of fear. Please be careful. I will do what is necessary. Khalid? Kevin's voice broke. If you don't come back, I told you what to do if that happens. I know. Survive until release. Don't try to avenge you. Get out and never come back. Kevin wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. But I want you to know that meeting you has been... It's been the only good thing that's happened to me in this place. You treated me like a person when everyone else treated me like prey. That matters. It matters more than I can say. Khalid crossed the cell and embraced the young man briefly. You are stronger than you know, Kevin. Remember that. Then he walked out of the cell and toward the showers. The corridor was quiet at this hour, most inmates still sleeping or just beginning to stir. Khalid's footsteps echoed off concrete walls as he approached the shower room, his senses heightened to a level he had not experienced since his final mission in Afghanistan. He could smell the mildew, an industrial cleaner that characterized every prison bathroom. He could hear water dripping from a faulty pipe somewhere in the distance. He could feel the subtle changes in air pressure that indicated multiple bodies were waiting just around the corner. 7 men. Maybe 8. All of them planning to kill him. Khalid Morrison, former petty officer, first-class United States Navy SEALs, took a deep breath and stepped into the shower room. For a moment, nothing happened. The room appeared empty, steam rising from showers that someone had turned on to create visual cover. Khalid walked forward calmly, his eyes adjusting to the humid air, his body automatically shifting into a balanced stance that could respond to threats from any direction. Snake stepped out from behind a row of lockers blocking the exit. Going somewhere, Towelhead. 2 more men emerged from the steam to Khalid's left, 2 more to his right, and from the far end of the shower room a shape that seemed to fill the entire doorway. Crusher. The rumors had not done him justice. The man was massive in a way that seemed to violate the laws of physics, his body a solid wall of muscle and violence that moved with surprising grace for someone his size. His face bore scars from countless fights, and his eyes held the empty calm of a predator who had stopped counting kills long ago. This the guy, Crusher's voice was like rocks grinding together, doesn't look like much. Don't underestimate him, Snake warned. He dropped Tank with 2 hits. Tank's soft. Been living on reputation instead of skill for years. Crusher rolled his shoulders, the motion causing muscles to ripple like tectonic plates shifting. This won't take long. Khalid remained perfectly still in the center of the room, his breathing slow and measured. He had been in situations like this before, outnumbered and outgunned, with death waiting in every direction. The key was not to panic. The key was to think clearly and act decisively when the moment came. You can still walk away, Khalid said quietly. All of you. This doesn't have to end in violence. Snake laughed. You hear that, boys? The dead man thinks he can negotiate. I'm not negotiating. I'm offering you a chance to survive. The words hung in the steam-filled air like a challenge. Crusher grinned, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. I like this one. He's got spirit. I'm going to enjoy breaking him. So... He moved faster than anyone his size should have been able to move, crossing the distance between them in 2 massive strides. His fist came down like a hammer aimed at the top of Khalid's skull with enough force to crush bone. Khalid wasn't there. He had slipped to the side at the last possible moment, a movement so economical it seemed almost lazy. Crusher's fist slammed into empty air, the momentum carrying him forward off balance. Khalid's palm struck the inside of Crusher's elbow, hyperextending the joint. At the same instant, his foot swept behind the giant's ankle, disrupting his already compromised balance. Crusher stumbled but didn't fall. He spun with a backhand that would have decapitated a smaller man. Khalid ducked under it and drove his knee into the nerve cluster on the outside of Crusher's thigh. The giant's leg buckled momentarily, buying Khalid 2 precious seconds. 2 seconds was enough. He drove his elbow into Crusher's solar plexus, then struck the same nerve point below the sternum that had dropped Tank in the library. The technique was called Silent Thunder, and against any normal man, it would have ended the fight instantly. Crusher grunted and staggered backward, but he didn't fall. That all you got? The giant was breathing hard, clearly hurt but still standing. Tank really is soft if that little love tap put him down. The other men began closing in, forming a ring around Khalid that left no avenue of escape. "Get him," Snake ordered, "all at once. Don't give him time to think." They rushed forward in a coordinated assault. What happened next was a blur of violence that none of them had anticipated. Khalid moved through the attackers like water through rocks, never stopping, never fighting force with force. He redirected their momentum against each other, used their bodies as shields, struck pressure points and nerve clusters that dropped men without killing them. The first attacker went down with a strike to the throat that collapsed his airway temporarily. The second took a palm heel to the chin that scrambled his consciousness. The third made the mistake of grabbing Khalid from behind, receiving an elbow to the ribs and a throw that sent him crashing into the fourth man. Snake produced a shiv from somewhere, a sharpened piece of metal that gleamed in the overhead lights. "I'm going to gut you like a fish," he snarled, slashing at Khalid's midsection. Khalid caught his wrist twisted sharply and heard the satisfying crack of breaking bone. The shiv clattered to the wet floor as Snake screamed and dropped to his knees. But Crusher was back. The giant had recovered from the silent thunderstrike faster than any opponent Khalid had ever faced. He grabbed Khalid from behind in a bear hug that lifted him completely off his feet, massive arms crushing the air from his lungs. "Got you now," Crusher growled in his ear. "How does it feel to be helpless?" Khalid's vision began to blur. His ribs creaked under the pressure. His lungs burned for oxygen that they couldn't access. In his mind, he heard the voice of his instructor at Coronado, a grizzled Master Chief who had trained 3 generations of SEALs. "When you can't breathe, you can't panic. Panic burns oxygen you don't have. Stay calm. Find the weakness. There is always a weakness." Khalid stopped struggling. He let his body go limp, conserving what little oxygen remained in his system. His fingers found Crusher's hands searching for the pressure points that controlled grip strength. There. He drove his thumbs into the nerve clusters with everything he had left, disrupting the signals that told Crusher's hands to stay closed. The grip loosened. Just a little. Just enough. Khalid dropped to the floor and rolled away, gasping for air. Crusher lunged after him, but Khalid was already moving, putting distance between them while his lungs recovered. "Tough little bastard," Crusher admitted, almost sounding impressed. "Most men would be unconscious by now." "I'm not most men." "No, you're not." Crusher cracked his neck, the sound echoing off the tile walls. "But you're still going to die. Just going to take a little longer than I thought." They circled each other, predator and prey, though it was no longer clear which was which. The other attackers were down or retreating, nursing injuries that would take weeks to heal. Only Crusher remained fully operational, his massive frame blocking the exit like a human wall. "Last chance," Khalid said, his breathing finally steadying. "Walk away." "Can't do that. Reputation's on the line. Mine and Tank's." Crusher shrugged his mountainous shoulders. "Besides, I don't get paid if you're still breathing." "Then I'm sorry for what comes next." Crusher charged. Khalid moved to meet him. The collision was brutal, 2 forces meeting in the steam-filled air of the prison shower room. Crusher's fist caught Khalid across the jaw, sending him spinning. Khalid's counter caught Crusher in the kidney, doubling him over. They exchanged blows that would have killed lesser men, each strike carrying years of training and violence behind it. Crusher landed a punch to Khalid's ribs that cracked at least one bone. Khalid responded with a combination to Crusher's face that opened a cut above his eye and blinded him temporarily with blood. Back and forth. Blood and sweat mixing with steam and the sounds of combat. Finally, Khalid saw his opening. Crusher overextended on a wild haymaker, his massive arm sweeping through empty air as Khalid ducked beneath it. In that moment of imbalance, Khalid struck. His palm heel caught Crusher under the chin with enough force to snap his head backward, before the giant could recover. Khalid was behind him, arm locked around his throat in a chokehold that cut off blood to the brain. "Sleep," Khalid whispered. Crusher struggled, his massive hands clawing at Khalid's arm, but the technique was perfect. Within seconds, his movement slowed. His eyes rolled back. His body went limp. Khalid held the chokehold for 3 more seconds to ensure unconsciousness, then released. Crusher collapsed to the wet floor like a fallen tree. Khalid stood over him, breathing hard, his body aching from a dozen injuries that would announce themselves more loudly in the hours to come. Around him, 7 men lay unconscious or incapacitated, victims of skills that should have faded with age but had proven as sharp as ever. The shower room door burst open. Guards flooded in tasers and batons at the ready, responding to an alarm that one of the injured attackers must have triggered. On the ground, now all of you. Khalid lowered himself to his knees and placed his hands behind his head, the familiar posture of surrender. He was bleeding from his forehead and his lip, his ribs screamed with every breath, and his shoulder throbbed from a punch he didn't even remember taking. But he was alive. 7 men had come to kill him, including the most dangerous enforcer in the Arizona prison system. He had beaten them all. Sergeant Martinez arrived 10 minutes later, his face grim as he surveyed the carnage. "Morrison, why am I not surprised?" "Self-defense," Khalid said quietly, still kneeling on the wet floor. "They ambushed me. I responded." 7 men ambushed you, including Crusher, and you just responded? Martinez shook his head slowly. "What the hell are you, Morrison, really? Because that file that says you're an accountant, it's missing some pretty significant information." "I'm just a man who wanted to take a shower in peace." Martinez studied him for a long moment, seeing something behind the quiet Muslim's eyes that he couldn't quite identify. Experience. Training. The cold efficiency of someone who had done violence professionally and survived. "Solitary confinement," Martinez said finally. 72 hours while we investigate. Standard procedure." "I understand." "And Morrison..." The sergeant's voice dropped so only Khalid could hear. "Whatever you are, whoever you used to be, I've got families here. Guards with kids at home. If this situation escalates any further, people who aren't inmates might get hurt." "I never wanted any of this, Sergeant. I just wanted to serve my time and go home." "Maybe, but that's not what's happening, is it?" Martinez gestured to his officers. "Take him to the hole. And get medical in here. Some of these men need to go to the infirmary." As Khalid was led away in handcuffs, he caught sight of Snake being loaded onto a stretcher, his broken wrist cradled against his chest. The man's eyes found Khalid's, and what Khalid saw there was not anger or hatred. It was fear. Pure primal fear. Word of the shower room battle reached Tank Rawlings within the hour. He was in his private cell when Snake's replacement brought the news, delivered in a voice that shook with something close to terror. "Crusher's down. All 7 of them are down. The Muslim did it alone." Tank sat very still, processing information that his mind refused to accept. 7 men, his best soldiers. Crusher, who had never lost a fight in 20 years. All of them defeated by a single accountant from Detroit who prayed 5 times a day and refused to eat pork. "How?" Tank's voice was barely a whisper. "Nobody knows. The guards found them all unconscious or incapacitated. Morrison had some injuries, but nothing serious. He walked to solitary under his own power." Tank stood and walked to a small window, staring out at the prison yard. A prison yard where inmates moved through their daily routines, unaware that their entire world was about to change. "Get me everything," he said finally. "Everything on Khalid Morrison. His real file, not the one they show the public. I don't care what it costs. I don't care who you have to bribe. I want to know exactly who I'm dealing with." And then, Tank turned, and the look on his face made the messenger take an involuntary step backward. "And then I'm going to destroy him. Not with fists, not with numbers. I'm going to find out what he loves most in this world, and I'm going to burn it to ashes in front of his eye." His hands curled into fists at his sides. Nobody beats Tank Rawlings. Nobody. 72 hours in solitary confinement. Khalid had spent longer periods in worse conditions during his years as a SEAL. The concrete box they called the hole was 7 feet by 7 feet, no window, no human contact except for the slot in console in the door where guards pushed trays of food twice a day. Most men went mad in solitary. Their minds, desperate for stimulation, turned against them, creating demons from shadows and enemies from silence. Khalid welcomed the silence. He prayed 5 times daily, his body moving through the familiar motions even without knowing the exact direction of Mecca. He recited surahs from the Quran that he had memorized during long nights in Afghanistan when sleep meant vulnerability and prayer meant survival. He allowed his battered body to heal, feeling his cracked rib knit slowly back together, the swelling around his eye gradually subsiding. But mostly he thought about his family. Amira's face appeared in the darkness when he closed his eye. Her smile on their wedding day radiant beneath a white hijab that her mother had worn 30 years before. Her tears when Maya was born, joy and exhaustion mingling on her beautiful face. Her steady presence through the years of his military service, never complaining, never demanding to know where he was or what he was doing, simply trusting that he would come home. He had promised her so many times that he would come home. And now, trapped in this concrete box in the Arizona desert, he wondered if he would be able to keep that promise. On the second day, a guard he didn't recognize appeared at his door. "Morrison, visitor." Khalid rose slowly, his body protesting the movement. "I wasn't told about any scheduled visits." "It's not on the schedule. Warden's orders." The guard opened the door and stepped back, his hand resting on his taser. "Follow me. No sudden movements." They walked through corridors that Khalid had never seen deeper into the administrative section of the prison where inmates rarely ventured. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with that same headache-inducing frequency, but Khalid barely noticed. His mind was racing through possibilities. Who would the warden allow to visit an inmate in solitary, and why? The answer was waiting in a small interrogation room. A man in his 50s sat at the metal table wearing a suit that cost more than most inmates would see in a lifetime. His hair was gray at the temples, his posture military straight, and his eyes held the same calm assessment that Khalid saw in his own mirror every morning. "Leave us," the man said to the guard. "Sir, regulations require." "I said leave us." The guard hesitated for only a moment before retreating, closing the door behind him. Khalid remained standing, studying the stranger who had somehow arranged a private meeting in the middle of his solitary confinement. "Sit down, Petty Officer Morrison." The use of his rank hit Khalid like a physical blow. He hadn't heard those words in over a decade. "Who are you?" "My name is Robert Chen. I work for people who take an interest in former members of specialized military units." Chen gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please, sit." Khalid sat. "You've created quite a situation for yourself." Chen continued, his voice conversational despite the gravity of the circumstances. 7 men in the infirmary, including a professional enforcer who has never lost a fight. The entire prison is talking about the Muslim accountant who can't be beaten. That kind of attention is dangerous for someone with your background. "My background is classified." "Yes, it is, and I'm one of the people who classified it." Chen leaned forward slightly. 12 years in the SEALs, 9 of them in Devgru, 17 confirmed operations in hostile territory, 3 Navy crosses that the public will never hear about, and a medical discharge after Operation Crimson Horizon, which officially never happened. Khalid's hands tightened involuntarily at the mention of Crimson Horizon. "What do you want? To help you, or more accurately, to help you help yourself." Chen pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. Derek Rawlings, known as Tank, 23 years into a life sentence. Gang connections throughout the Arizona prison system, suspected of ordering at least 6 murders behind bars, none of which have ever been successfully prosecuted. "I know who Tank is." "Do you know that he's currently trying to access your sealed military records?" Khalid's blood ran cold. "He can't," Khalid said quietly. "Those records don't exist in any system he could access." "He can't access them directly, no, but he has connections to people who have connections to people. Money flows, favors are exchanged, and suddenly information that should be classified finds its way into the wrong hands." Chen tapped the folder. "As of this morning, Tank Rawlings knows that you were a Navy SEAL. He doesn't know about Devgru yet, but it's only a matter of time." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your military record isn't the only thing he's researching." Chen's eyes hardened. "He's also gathering information about your family, your wife Amira, your daughter Maya, your son Omar, your youngest daughter Layla." The words hit Khalid harder than any of Crusher's punches. "If you're trying to scare me..." "I'm trying to warn you. Tank Rawlings is a violent psychopath who has spent 2 decades learning how to hurt people in ways that don't leave evidence. He knows he can't beat you physically, so he's going to find another way. And the most effective way to destroy a man like you is to threaten the people you love." Khalid forced his breathing to remain steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. "What can I do?" "That depends on what you're willing to accept." Chen pulled another document from his briefcase. "I can arrange for your family to be placed under protective surveillance. Federal marshals 24/7 monitoring instant response if anyone approaches them. In exchange, you would cooperate with an ongoing investigation into Tank Rawlings' organization." "You want me to be an informant?" "I want you to help us take down a man who has made this prison into his personal kingdom for over 20 years. The information you could provide, the access you could gain, it would be invaluable." Khalid stared at the document, his mind racing through implications and consequences. Becoming an informant in a place like Stonegate was a death sentence if anyone found out. But refusing meant leaving his family vulnerable to whatever Tank was planning. "How do I know you can actually protect them?" "You don't, but you know what Tank Rawlings is capable of." Chen met his eyes without flinching. "The question is whether you're willing to bet your family's safety on hope alone." Khalid closed his eyes and whispered a prayer for guidance. Then he reached for the document. Tank Rawlings received the intelligence report at 11 o'clock that night. The information had cost him nearly every favor he had accumulated over 2 decades, plus a substantial payment to a corrupt federal employee who would probably spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. But as Tank read through the pages, he knew every dollar and every favor had been worth it. Navy SEAL, he breathed the words coming out like a curse. 12 years, special operations, classify missions. Snake's replacement, a younger man named Viper, who had earned his position by surviving the shower room battle with only a concussion, leaned forward with interest. That explains how he took down Crusher. It explains everything. Tank threw the papers onto his bunk and began pacing his cell like a caged animal. No wonder he's not afraid. No wonder he fights like a demon. He's been trained by the best military in the world to do exactly what he's been doing. So what do we do if we can't beat him physically? We don't beat him physically. Tank's voice dropped to a whisper. We beat him here. He tapped his temple. And here. He tapped his chest. Every man has a weakness, Viper. Every man has something that matters more to him than his own life. For soldiers especially, the really good ones, that weakness is always the same. Family. Family. Tank smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Wife, kids, the people they fight to protect. Take those away or threaten to take them away, and even the strongest warrior will break. Viper shifted uncomfortably. Going after family is dangerous, boss. Brings heat from people we don't want attention from. We're not going to touch them, not directly. Tank pulled out another set of documents these ones obtained, this fictional through different channels. We're just going to make sure our friend Khalid Morrison knows exactly how vulnerable they are. An address, a daily schedule, the school his children attend, the route his wife takes to the grocery store. He spread the papers across his bunk like a general planning a campaign. We're going to send him a message that even a Navy SEAL can't ignore. And if he still doesn't break, Tank's smile widened. Then we stop sending messages and start making phone calls. I have friends on the outside who owe me favors. Friends who would be happy to visit a pretty Muslim woman and her 3 children just to deliver a personal greeting from me. Viper said nothing, but something in his eyes suggested he was already regretting his promotion to Snake's position. Khalid returned to general population 3 days later. The change in the prison's atmosphere was immediate and unmistakable. Inmates who had once looked at him with curiosity now looked at him with something closer to reverence. Guards who had treated him with casual contempt now nodded respectfully as he passed. Even the air itself seemed different, charged with an electricity that hadn't existed before. He had become a legend. Kevin was waiting in their cell when he arrived, his face a mixture of relief and barely contained excitement. You're alive, I knew you would be. I told everyone you would be, but some people said Crusher must have finished you off in solitary when the guards weren't looking, and I was so worried. Kevin. Khalid held up a hand to stop the flood of words. Breathe. Kevin took a deep breath, then immediately continued. Is it true, 7 men? You really beat 7 men, including Crusher? It's true. How, I know you said you were military, but still. 7 men. Crusher alone is supposed to be worth 10 regular fighters. Khalid sat on his bunk and allowed himself a moment of exhaustion. The 72 hours in solitary had given his body time to heal, but the meeting with Robert Chen had left his mind racing with fears that no amount of rest could quiet. Training, he said simply, and a willingness to do what needed to be done. The whole prison is talking about you. They're saying you're untouchable. That Tank is afraid to make another move, because he knows you'll destroy anyone he sends. Tank isn't afraid. He's planning. Kevin's excitement faded immediately. Planning what? Khalid considered how much to share with his young cellmate. Kevin had proven himself loyal during the weeks they had spent together, but the information Chen had provided was dangerous. Knowledge could make Kevin a target. I don't know yet, Khalid lied, but I know he won't stop. Men like Tank don't accept defeat. They just find new ways to attack. Maybe he'll transfer to another facility. Some of the guys are saying the warden is going to move him to Supermax after what happened. The warden won't move Tank anywhere. He's too valuable for maintaining order in this place. Khalid shook his head slowly. No, whatever comes next, it won't be from the administration. It will come from Tank directly. The first message arrived 2 days later. Khalid was in the library reading a new book that Mrs. Rodriguez had acquired specifically for him when an inmate he didn't recognize approached his table. The man was young, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and trembling hands that suggested he was acting under duress rather than choice. Morrison, Khalid looked up from his book. Yes? The man placed a folded piece of paper on the table and immediately retreated, disappearing into the stacks before Khalid could ask any questions. Khalid unfolded the paper. His blood turned to ice. It was a photograph of his house in Detroit. His home where Amira and the children lived, where Maya practiced piano in the living room, and Omar shot basketball in the driveway, and Layla drew pictures on the kitchen table. The photograph had been taken recently within the last few days and showed Amira walking from the front door to her car completely unaware that she was being watched. Written beneath the photograph were 4 words, "Beautiful family you have." Khalid's hands began to shake. Not with fear, with rage. A fury unlike anything he had experienced since his darkest days in combat, a white-hot anger that threatened to consume every rational thought in his mind. Someone had been watching his family. Someone had been close enough to take this photograph, close enough to harm them, if they chose. And that someone was sending him a message. His first instinct was to find Tank immediately and end this war with permanent violence. He could do it. He knew exactly how to kill a man quickly and quietly, how to make it look like a heart attack or a stroke, how to ensure that no evidence would ever point to him. But that would mean becoming the weapon again. That would mean abandoning everything he had built since leaving the SEALs, everything he had promised himself, and Amira and his children. He had sworn to never take another life unless absolutely necessary. He had sworn to be a man of peace, a man of faith, a man worthy of the family waiting for him. Khalid forced himself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The techniques he had learned in survival training designed to maintain calm under the most extreme pressure. He could not lose control, not here, not now. He needed to think. The phone bank was crowded when Khalid arrived for his scheduled call time that afternoon. Normally, he would have waited patiently in line using the time to prepare himself for the brief conversation with Amira. But today was different. Today, every second felt like an eternity. "Hey, Morrison?" An inmate near the front of the line turned and gestured for him to approach. "You want to cut ahead, nobody's going to complain." The offer was unprecedented. Phone time was precious currency in Stonegate, and cutting in line was an offense that could start fights under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances. Khalid Morrison had earned respect that transcended the usual rules. "Thank you," Khalid said quietly, moving to the front of the line. No one objected. He dialed with fingers that still wanted to tremble and pressed the receiver to his ear, waiting through rings that seemed to last forever. "Hello?" Amira's voice washed over him like cool water on burning skin. "It's me." "Khalid, I wasn't expecting your call until tomorrow. Is everything all right?" He wanted to tell her. He wanted to warn her about the photograph, about Tank's threats, about the danger that was circling closer to their home with every passing hour. But what good would that do? She would panic. The children would sense her fear, and there was nothing she could do to protect herself that the federal marshals Chen had promised weren't already doing. "Everything is fine," he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "I just needed to hear your voice." "Khalid?" Her tone shifted, becoming the gentle but firm voice of a woman who had been married to him for 15 years and knew when he was hiding something. "What's wrong? And don't tell me nothing. I can hear it in your voice." "I miss you. I miss the children. That's all." "That's not all. You've missed us every day since you went away, and you've never called early just to talk about it." She paused. "Is someone threatening you? Are you in danger?" "No more than usual." "That's not an answer." Khalid closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against the cool metal of the phone booth. She deserved the truth. She had always deserved the truth, even when the truth was terrifying. "There's a man here who doesn't like me. He's been trying to intimidate me, and when that didn't work, Khalid swallowed hard. "He obtained information about you and the children, where we live, your daily routines." Silence on the other end of the line. "Amira, I'm here." Her voice had changed, becoming steel wrapped in silk. The voice of a woman who had waited through countless deployments, never knowing if her husband would return alive. "What do you need me to do?" "Be careful. Be aware of your surroundings. If you see anyone watching the house, anyone you don't recognize in the neighborhood, call the police immediately." "Should I take the children somewhere else? My mother's house in Ohio." "No, stay where you are for now. There are people watching out for you. People I can't explain. Just know that you're not alone." Another pause. "Federal people like the ones who came when you first left the military?" Khalid had forgotten how perceptive his wife could be. "Something like that." "Khalid," her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't become who you used to be. Don't let this man, whoever he is, turn you back into a weapon. You worked so hard to find peace to become the man you wanted to be. Don't throw that away for revenge." The words cut deeper than any blade. "I don't know if I can make that promise." "You have to try. For me, for Maya and Omar and Layla. We need you to come home as their father, not as the soldier who haunted our house for years after you left the service. Do you understand? I understand. Promise me. Khalid gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. I promise I will try. That's all I can ask. Her voice softened again. I love you, Khalid. Whatever happens, whatever you have to do to survive that place, remember that we love you, and we're waiting for you. I love you too. Kiss the children for me. He hung up and stood there for a long moment, his hand still resting on the receiver. Then he turned and walked out of the phone area, his mind already working through the implications of his conversation with Chen and the threat that Tank's photograph represented. He had promised Amira he would try not to become a weapon again. He had not promised he would succeed. The second message came 3 days later. This time it was photographs of his children. Maya walking home from school, her backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds and completely oblivious to the camera watching her from across the street. Omar playing basketball in the park with friends laughing at something one of them had said his father's athletic build already evident in his teenage frame. Layla holding her mother's hand outside a grocery store, her small face bright with excitement about something they were about to buy. Each photograph had been taken from a different location on a different day by someone who was clearly following his family systematically. The note attached to the photographs was longer this time. They looked so happy, so innocent. It would be a shame if something happened to change that. You know what I want, Morrison. Kneel before me in front of the entire cafeteria, renounce your faith, and beg for my forgiveness. Do that, and your family stays safe. Refuse, and I start making phone calls. Khalid read the note 3 times. Then he tore it into tiny pieces and flushed it down the toilet in his cell. Kevin watched with wide eyes, but said nothing. That evening, after lights out, Kevin finally broke the silence. What did he send you? I saw your face when you read it. I've never seen you look like that. Photographs of my family. Threats. Oh God, Khalid, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If I hadn't told you to fight back, maybe... This is not your fault. Khalid's voice was firm despite the turmoil in his heart. Tank Rawlings is responsible for his own choices. He decided to threaten innocent women and children to get to me. That is his sin, not yours. What are you going to do? Khalid stared at the ceiling of their tiny cell, watching shadows move in the dim light from the corridor outside. I'm going to end this. How? I don't know yet, but I know that running isn't an option, hiding isn't an option, and surrendering to his demands would only encourage him to ask for more. Kevin was quiet for a moment. You're going to kill him, aren't you? That's what you mean by ending this. I don't want to kill anyone. I spent 12 years killing people, and every one of those deaths left a scar on my soul. But if he forces my hand, if he actually harms my family... Khalid's voice hardened into something unrecognizable. Then I will do what needs to be done. And I will accept whatever consequences follow. What about your promise to your wife? You told her you would try not to become a weapon again. I told her I would try. I didn't promise I would succeed. The third message arrived the following morning, but this time it wasn't a photograph. It was a phone. A cheap burner phone smuggled into the prison through channels that Tank controlled, left on Khalid's breakfast tray when he wasn't looking. As he picked it up, it began to vibrate with an incoming call. Khalid answered. Hello, Morrison? Tank's voice was smooth, almost friendly, like they were old acquaintances catching up. I see you've been ignoring my messages. That's not very polite. I have nothing to say to you. Maybe not, but I have plenty to say to you. Tank chuckled. Did you enjoy the pictures? Your wife is beautiful, by the way. I can see why you miss her. And those kids so young and innocent, it would really break my heart if something happened to them. Khalid's hand tightened on the phone. If you touch them... If I touch them, what? You'll kill me. You're welcome to try. But here's the thing, Morrison. I don't need to touch them personally. I have friends outside who would be happy to pay your family a visit. Friends who enjoy their work a little too much, if you know what I mean. What do you want? I told you what I want. Kneel before me in the cafeteria. Renounce your faith publicly. Beg for my forgiveness. Do that, and this all goes away. Your family stays safe. Your reputation takes a hit, sure, but you get to see your kids grow up. Seems like a fair trade to me. Khalid closed his eyes, his mind racing through options and contingencies. Tank held the advantage in this moment. He had leverage that Khalid couldn't counter with physical force, but he also had weaknesses. Every king did. When do you want this to happen? Tomorrow, lunchtime, maximum audience? Tank's voice dripped with satisfaction. And Morrison, if you try anything clever, if you fight back or refuse once we're in the cafeteria, my friends make that phone call immediately. Your wife answers the door expecting a delivery driver, and instead, she meets someone who's going to teach her what happens to people who don't respect Tank Rawlings. I understand. I knew you would. See you tomorrow, Morrison, and bring your prayer rug. You're going to need something to kneel on. The line went dead. Khalid stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to his ear, his mind working through possibilities at a speed that would have impressed his former commanding officers. Tank thought he had won. Tank was wrong. Khalid did not sleep that night. He lay on his bunk staring at the concrete ceiling, his mind running through scenarios and contingencies like a computer processing data. Tank believed he had created an unwinnable situation. Khalid would either submit publicly and lose everything he stood for, or refuse and watch his family suffer the consequences. But Tank had made a critical error. He had given Khalid time to prepare. At 3 a.m, Khalid slipped out of his bunk and retrieved the burner phone from its hiding place beneath his mattress. The device was a liability evidence of contraband that could add years to his sentence, but it was also an opportunity. He dialed a number he had memorized during his meeting with Robert Chen. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. Morrison, I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. Tank made contact. He's threatening my family. Photographs, surveillance. He has people watching them. We know. Our team intercepted communications from his outside contacts 3 hours ago. Khalid's breath caught. You're already monitoring him. We've been monitoring him since you agreed to cooperate. Tank Rawlings has no idea how closely he's being watched. Chen's voice remained calm, professional. The men he hired to surveil your family have been identified and are under observation. They won't get within 100 yards of your wife or children. Relief washed through Khalid like a wave, but he forced himself to stay focused. Tank doesn't know that. He thinks he has leverage. Which gives us an opportunity. There was a pause on the line. What exactly is he demanding? Public humiliation. Tomorrow in the cafeteria. He wants me to kneel before him, renounce my faith, beg for forgiveness. Khalid's voice hardened. And if I refuse or fight back, he makes a phone call. A phone call to men who will be in federal custody before lunch tomorrow. He doesn't know that. No, he doesn't. Chen was quiet for a moment. What are you thinking, Morrison? I'm thinking that Tank has finally overplayed his hand. He's so focused on breaking me that he's exposed his entire operation, the outside contacts, the communication channels, the leverage he uses to control everyone in this prison. Khalid sat up on his bunk, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. If we play this right, we can take him down, completely, not just for what he's done to me, but for everything. That's exactly what I was hoping you would say. The plan came together over the next hour. Chen would coordinate with federal agents to arrest Tank's outside contacts at precisely 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled confrontation in the cafeteria. At the same time, a team would move on the corrupt guard who had been feeding Tank information about Khalid's family. Khalid's role was simple, but dangerous. He would go to the cafeteria as Tank expected. He would face whatever humiliation Tank had planned. And he would stall for time until Chen's people confirmed that all outside threats had been neutralized. What happens after the arrests? Khalid asked. Tank loses his leverage, his outside network collapses, and you... Chen paused. You do whatever you need to do. Whatever I need to do. Morrison, I've read your file, all of it. I know what you're capable of, and I'm telling you now that whatever happens in that cafeteria after our people move, we won't be watching too closely. If Tank Rawlings suffers some kind of accident, if he falls and hits his head or finds himself unable to continue his criminal enterprise, well, these things happen in prison. Khalid understood what Chen was offering. Permission. I told my wife I would try not to become a weapon again. And I'm not asking you to become one. I'm simply saying that if Tank Rawlings pushes you to defend yourself, no one will question the outcome. You're a former Navy SEAL who was attacked by a violent gang leader. Any response you make will be considered proportional. The call ended at 4 a.m. Khalid had 7 hours until the confrontation that would determine everything. Kevin woke at 6 to find his cellmate sitting cross-legged on the floor facing east, his lips moving silently in prayer. There was something different about Khalid this morning, something Kevin couldn't quite identify. A stillness that went beyond his usual calm, a focus that seemed almost supernatural. You're going through with it, Kevin said quietly. The cafeteria thing. Khalid finished his prayer before responding. Yes. Are you going to do what he wants? Kneel and beg. I'm going to do what needs to be done. Kevin studied his cellmate's face, searching for some hint of fear or doubt. He found neither. Instead, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The eyes looking back at him did not belong to a quiet Muslim accountant. They belong to a predator. Khalid, whatever happens today, I want you to know that you've been the best cellmate I've ever had. The best friend, really. You treated me like a person when everyone else treated me like nothing. This isn't goodbye, Kevin. I know, Kevin's voice cracked. I just wanted to say it. In case. Khalid rose from the floor and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Whatever you see in that cafeteria today, whatever happens, remember one thing. I am not the victim here. I have never been the victim. Tank Rawlings made the mistake of confusing gentleness with weakness. Today he learns the difference. Kevin nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Now go to the library at 11. Stay there until someone comes to tell you it's over. Can you do that for me? I can do that. Good. Khalid squeezed his shoulder briefly, then released him. May God protect you, Kevin Wright. The morning passed in slow motion. Khalid went through his usual routine with mechanical precision. Breakfast in the cafeteria where he sat at table 9 and ate nothing, his eyes scanning the room constantly for Tank's crew. They were there scattered throughout the space, watching him with barely concealed anticipation. The news of today's showdown had spread through the prison overnight, and every inmate in Stonegate seemed to know that something momentous was about to happen. At 10 o'clock, Khalid retreated to the chapel for morning prayers. Father Miguel was there as he usually was at this hour, preparing for the daily service that drew a handful of inmates seeking something beyond the concrete walls that confined them. You seem troubled today, the priest observed. More than usual. I'm facing a difficult situation. Would you like to talk about it? Khalid considered the offer. Father Miguel was a good man, a genuine servant of his faith who had spent decades ministering to men that society had discarded. He deserved honesty. There's a man in this prison who wants to destroy me. He's threatened my family. He's given me an ultimatum that I cannot accept. What kind of ultimatum? He wants me to renounce my faith publicly, to kneel before him and beg for forgiveness. Father Miguel's expression darkened. Tank Rawlings. You know about this. There are no secrets in a prison, my friend. Everyone knows that Tank has been targeting you since your arrival. The priest sat down heavily in one of the wooden pews. What are you going to do? What I have to do. And what is that exactly? Will you give him what he wants? Will you fight him? Father Miguel looked up with eyes that had seen too much violence over the years. Will you kill him? Khalid was silent for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted finally. I've spent the last 10 years trying to be something other than a weapon. I found Islam. I found peace. I found a way to be a husband and father instead of a soldier. But Tank is forcing me to choose between my faith and my family, and if it comes down to that choice, you'll choose your family. Wouldn't you? Father Miguel sighed. I'm a priest. I'm supposed to tell you that violence is never the answer, that you should trust in God and turn the other cheek. He met Khalid's eyes with unexpected intensity. But I'm also a man who has watched Tank Rawlings terrorize this prison for 20 years. I've seen what he does to people. I've given last rites to men he's destroyed, and I'm not sure my conscience would be troubled if someone finally stopped him. Is that absolution, Father? It's honesty. What you do with it is between you and Allah. Khalid nodded slowly and rose to leave. At the door, he paused. Thank you, Father, for everything. Go with God, Khalid. Whichever God you pray to, I believe he's listening. At 11:30, Khalid walked into the cafeteria. The noise level dropped immediately as every eye in the room turned toward him. Inmates stopped eating. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the guards stationed around the perimeter seemed to hold their breath, sensing that something unprecedented was about to unfold. Tank was waiting at his usual table, surrounded by what remained of his crew after the shower room battle. Crusher was notably absent, still recovering in the infirmary, but there were at least a dozen men positioned throughout the cafeteria who bore Tank's colors and answered to his commands. Morrison? Tank's voice boomed across the suddenly silent room. You came. I wasn't sure you would. Khalid walked forward slowly, his eyes never leaving Tank's face. Every step was measured deliberate, carrying him closer to the moment that would determine everything. You gave me a choice, Khalid said, stopping 10 feet from Tank's table. I'm here to give you my answer. Before you do that, let me remind you of the stakes. Tank pulled out a cell phone, a twin to the burner he had given Khalid. One call, that's all it takes. One call and your pretty wife finds out what happens to people who disrespect me. Your kids learn a lesson they'll never forget. He smiled, showing teeth. So choose your next words very carefully. Khalid looked at the phone in Tank's hand. Then he looked at his watch. 11:43 a.m. 2 minutes. "You think you have power over me?" Khalid said, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "You think because you can threaten my family, you control my choices. But you're wrong, Tank. You've been wrong about me from the very beginning." Tank's smile flickered. "Is that so?" "You saw a quiet Muslim who prayed 5 times a day and refused to eat pork. You saw an easy target, a victim." Khalid took a step closer. "You never saw what was underneath." "I know exactly what's underneath. Navy SEAL Wright, 12 years of special operations." Tank shrugged. "Yeah, I did my homework. Impressive resume, but it doesn't matter. You can be the deadliest warrior in the world, and it won't save your family if I make that call." "You're right, it won't." Another step closer. 11:44 a.m. "But there's something you don't know, Tank. Something that's going to change everything." "And what's that?" Khalid smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "You're not the only one who's been doing homework." Tank's confidence wavered for the first time. Something in Khalid's voice and his posture and the absolute certainty radiating from his every word was wrong. This wasn't how a man facing impossible odds was supposed to act. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that while you were sending me photographs and making threats, I was making arrangements of my own. I'm talking about the men you hired to watch my family, the ones you think are waiting for your call." Khalid glanced at his watch again. 11:45 a.m. "They're not waiting for anything anymore." Tank's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Khalid gestured toward the cafeteria's barred windows. "Why don't you make that call and find out?" For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Tank raised the phone and dialed. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. Tank's hand began to shake. He dialed another number. Same result. A third number. Nothing. "What did you do?" Tank's voice cracked with something that sounded almost like fear. "What the hell did you do?" "I told you, I made arrangements." Khalid took another step forward, now close enough to touch. "Your men outside are in federal custody. The guard who was feeding you information about my family is being arrested as we speak. The network you spent 20 years building just collapsed." Tank stared at him with wild eyes, his mind clearly struggling to process the implications. "You're lying. You have to be lying. There's no way you could." "I'm a Navy SEAL, Tank. Did you think my connections ended when I left the service?" Khalid's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent cafeteria. "I've been cooperating with federal investigators since the day I arrived here. Every threat you made, every move you planned, every contact you reached out to, they knew. They were waiting." Tank's crew began shifting, nervously exchanging glances that spoke of uncertainty and fear. Their invincible leader had just been exposed as vulnerable. The leverage that protected him had evaporated in an instant. "This is a trick," Tank sputtered. "Some kind of mind game. My people are fine. They're just not answering because they're in handcuffs." Khalid cut him off without raising his voice. "Face it, Tank. You've lost. Not just this confrontation. Everything. The empire you built. The fear that protected you. The men who followed your orders because they thought you were untouchable." He looked around at the watching inmates. "Everyone in this room now knows the truth. Tank Rawlings is just a man, and men can be beaten." Something snapped behind Tank's eyes. The careful calculation that had made him dangerous for 2 decades disappeared, replaced by pure animal rage. He lunged across the table with a roar, his massive hands reaching for Khalid's throat. Khalid had been expecting exactly this. He sidestepped the charge with fluid grace, redirecting Tank's momentum with a technique he had learned decades ago. The bigger man stumbled past him, carried by his own weight and fury, and crashed into an empty table. "You're going to die," Tank screamed, scrambling to his feet. "You hear me? I'm going to kill you with my bare hands. You're welcome to try." Tank charged again, this time with more control, throwing combinations that would have destroyed an ordinary man. But Khalid wasn't ordinary. He slipped punches, deflected grabs, and countered with strikes that found nerves and pressure points with surgical precision. Tank's crew moved to intervene, but the other inmates in the cafeteria blocked their path. The power dynamic had shifted. Everyone could see that Tank was losing, and nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of history. "Stand down!" one of the guards shouted, but nobody was listening anymore. Tank landed a glancing blow to Khalid's ribs that made him grunt with pain. He followed with an elbow that Khalid barely dodged the air whistling past his ear. Despite his rage, Tank was still a dangerous fighter, and he had the advantage of size and reach. But Khalid had something Tank didn't: training. He waited for Tank to overextend on a wild haymaker, then stepped inside the blow and drove his palm into the pressure point beneath Tank's armpit. The shock paralyzed Tank's right arm momentarily, leaving his entire side exposed. Khalid didn't hesitate. He delivered 3 rapid strikes to Tank's torso, targeting nerves and organs with the precision of a surgeon. Kidney, liver, solar plexus. Each blow was calibrated to cause maximum pain without permanent damage. Tank doubled over, gasping for air that his lungs couldn't process. Khalid grabbed him by the back of the neck and forced him down onto his knees. The cafeteria went completely silent. Tank Rawlings, the most feared man in Stonegate Federal Prison, was kneeling before the quiet Muslim he had tried to break. "You wanted me to kneel," Khalid said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "You wanted me to beg. You wanted me to renounce everything I believe in just to satisfy your ego." Tank tried to speak, but only a wheeze came out. "Here's what's going to happen instead." Khalid leaned close to Tank's ear, his voice dropping to a whisper that only the beaten man could hear. "You're going to spend the rest of your life knowing that you lost. Not to a gang, not to the guards, not to the system, to a single man who refused to bow." He released Tank's neck and stepped back. Tank collapsed onto his hands and knees, coughing and gasping, his face twisted with pain and humiliation. His crew stood frozen, unsure of what to do now that their leader had been so thoroughly defeated. Khalid looked around the cafeteria at the hundreds of faces watching him. "I never wanted this," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I came to this prison to serve my time in peace, to pay for my mistakes and return to my family. That's all I ever wanted." He turned back to Tank, who was struggling to raise his head. "You forced me to become something I promised myself I would never be again. You threatened innocent women and children. You tried to break me by destroying everything I love." Khalid's voice hardened. "So remember this moment, Tank. Remember how it feels to be powerless, to have everything taken from you, to be forced onto your knees by someone stronger than you." He paused. "That's the feeling my family would have had if your men had reached them. That's what you were willing to inflict on innocent people just to prove a point." Tank finally managed to raise his head, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over," he rasped. "You hear me? This isn't—" "Yes," Khalid interrupted quietly. "It is." He turned and walked away, leaving Tank kneeling on the cafeteria floor, surrounded by the ruins of his empire. The guards finally moved in shouting orders, trying to restore some semblance of control. But the damage was done. Every inmate in Stonegate had just witnessed the impossible. Tank Rawlings had been defeated, and Khalid Morrison had walked away without a scratch. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Federal agents arrived at Stonegate within the hour, armed with warrants and evidence that had been accumulating for months. Tank was taken into custody for a new arraignment, facing charges that would add decades to his already life sentence. His crew scattered some cutting deals with prosecutors, others simply disappearing into the general population and hoping to be forgotten. Robert Chen came to visit Khalid that evening. "Well done," Chen said, settling into the chair across from Khalid in the private meeting room. "Tank's entire organization is dismantled. We've arrested 17 people outside the prison, including 5 who were directly involved in surveilling your family." "Are they safe, Amira and the children?" "Completely. They were never in real danger. We had agents watching the watchers the entire time." Chen smiled slightly. "Your wife, by the way, suspected something was happening. She called our field office 3 days ago to report suspicious vehicles in her neighborhood. Woman has good instincts." "She's had practice. 15 years of being married to a SEAL taught her to trust her gut." "The Bureau was impressed with how you handled this. The intelligence you provided, the evidence we gathered. It's enough to put Tank away for good. No parole, no deals, no hope of ever walking free again." Khalid nodded slowly, but there was no satisfaction in his expression. "I didn't want this, Chen. Any of it. I came here to serve my time and go home. Tank forced my hand. Some men don't give you a choice. You know that better than most." "I know." Khalid was quiet for a moment. "What happens now, to me, I mean." "Officially, nothing. You defended yourself against an attack in the cafeteria. Multiple witnesses confirm that Tank initiated the violence. The administration is going to bury this as deeply as they can and hope nobody asks questions. And unofficially," Chen leaned forward, "unofficially you've done us a significant service. The kind of service that certain people in certain agencies remember. When you're up for parole in a few years, you might find that your application moves through the system faster than expected." "I don't want favors. I just want to serve my time and go home." "Then that's what will happen." Chen stood and extended his hand. It's been an honor working with you, Morrison. Whatever you used to be, whatever you are now, you're a good man." Khalid shook his hand. Then Chen was gone, and Khalid was alone with his thoughts. The phone call to Amira that night was the longest they had shared since his incarceration. "It's over," Khalid told her, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. "The man who was threatening us has been arrested. The people he hired to watch you are in federal custody. You're safe. The children are safe." Amira was silent for so long that Khalid thought the connection had dropped. "Amira? I'm here." Her voice was thick with tears. I don't know what to say. I've been so scared, Khalid. Every time someone knocked on the door, every time a car drove slowly past the house, I thought, I know, I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this to touch you." "Don't apologize. You protected us. Whatever you had to do, whatever you became to keep us safe. That's what a husband and father is supposed to do. I promised you I would try not to become a weapon again." "And did you?" Khalid thought about the cafeteria, about Tank kneeling on the floor, about the precise clinical violence he had employed to achieve that outcome. "I don't know," he admitted. "I did what needed to be done. I'm not sure what that makes me." "It makes you my husband," Amira said firmly. "It makes you Maya and Omar and Layla's father. It makes you a man who protects his family no matter the cost. That's nothing to be ashamed of." "I love you." "I love you too. Come home to us, Khalid. Serve your time and come home." "I will, I promise." He hung up the phone and walked back to his cell where Kevin was waiting with 100 questions and a smile that threatened to split his face in half. "Everyone's talking about what you did. They're saying you took down Tank in front of the whole cafeteria. They're saying you're the most dangerous man in Stonegate." "I'm not dangerous, Kevin. I'm just a man who was pushed too far." "Maybe, but you're also my cellmate, which means I'm basically untouchable now." Kevin laughed with genuine joy. "Nobody's going to mess with the guy who shares a cell with the man who beat Tank Rawlings." Khalid almost smiled. Almost. Because despite everything that had happened, despite the victory and the vindication and the knowledge that his family was safe, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed within him. He had promised Amira he would try not to become a weapon again. He had tried, and he had failed. The question now was whether he could find his way back to the man he had been before Tank Rawlings had forced him to remember who he used to be. That night, after Kevin had fallen asleep, Khalid performed his evening prayers with more intensity than he had in years. He prayed for forgiveness, he prayed for guidance, and he prayed for the strength to remain human in a place designed to bring out the worst in everyone who entered it. Somewhere in the darkness, he heard a voice that might have been his conscience or might have been something else entirely. "The war is over," the voice said, "but the battle for your soul has just begun." Khalid Morrison closed his eyes and surrendered himself to whatever came next. 3 years passed. 3 years of mornings that began with prayer and evenings that ended with longing. 3 years of phone calls that never felt long enough and visits that always ended too soon. 3 years of watching Kevin Wright walk out of Stonegate as a free man, his 18 months finally complete his life waiting to begin again. "Don't forget about me," Kevin had said on his last day, his eyes bright with tears he refused to let fall. "When you get out, come find me. I owe you everything." "You owe me nothing. Just live a good life. That's the only payment I need." Kevin had embraced him then, quick and fierce, the way a son might embrace a father he wasn't sure he would ever see again. Then he was gone, walking through the gates of Stonegate Federal Prison, into a world that Khalid Morrison could only remember in dreams. The prison had changed after Tank's fall. Power vacuums create chaos in places like Stonegate, and the months following Tank's removal had been violent and unpredictable. Gang leaders from other blocks moved in to claim territory. Old feuds reignited. Blood was spilled in showers and recreation yards and dark corners where guards pretended not to see, but none of it touched Khalid. His reputation had grown into something approaching myth. The quiet Muslim who had defeated Tank Rawlings with his bare hands. The former Navy SEAL who couldn't be beaten, couldn't be broken, couldn't be bent to anyone's will. Inmates sought his protection. Guards treated him with respect that bordered on deference. Even the new power players who emerged from Tank's shadow gave him wide berth. Khalid wanted none of it. He continued his routine. Prayer 5 times daily, philosophy books from the library, weekly phone calls to Amira and the children. He volunteered to teach literacy classes to inmates who had never learned to read. He led informal discussion groups about faith and redemption for men who had given up on both. He became something he had never expected to be. A leader. Not the kind who demanded obedience through violence, but the kind who inspired change through example. Men who had spent years hardening themselves against the world found themselves softening in his presence. Men who had abandoned hope began to believe that redemption was possible. Father Miguel watched this transformation with something approaching wonder. "You've done more good in this prison than I have in 20 years, the priest told him one afternoon. "I preach about salvation, but you live it. These men see you and they believe that if Khalid Morrison can find peace after everything he's done, maybe they can too." "I haven't found peace, Father. I've just learned to live with its absence." "That's not what I see when I watch you pray. That's not what I hear when you talk to the men in your literacy class." Father Miguel smiled gently. "Whatever you think you've lost, I believe you're finding your way back to it." Khalid wanted to believe him. Some days he almost did. The parole hearing came in the 6th year of his sentence. Robert Chen had kept his word. Khalid's application moved through the system with unusual speed, supported by letters from prison staff, federal agents, and even a few judges who had been quietly informed of his cooperation in dismantling Tank Rawlings' organization. Khalid sat before the parole board in a suit that Amira had sent him, the first civilian clothes he had worn in 6 years. His beard was neatly trimmed, his posture straight, his hands folded calmly on the table in front of him. "Mr. Morrison." The board chairwoman, a severe woman in her 60s, peered at him over reading glasses. "You've served 6 years of an 8-year sentence for tax evasion, money laundering, and fraud. During your incarceration, you have been involved in multiple violent incidents." "Self-defense, ma'am. Every incident has been documented as such." "Be that as it may, your record shows a pattern of physical confrontation that concerns this board." "With respect, ma'am, my record also shows 6 years of exemplary behavior outside of those incidents. I've completed every rehabilitation program available. I've taught literacy to over 200 inmates. I've led faith-based discussion groups that have contributed to measurable reductions in violence on my block." Khalid met her eyes without flinching. "I am not the same man who entered this prison. I've paid for my crimes, and I'm ready to return to my family." The chairwoman exchanged glances with the other board members. "Your family. Tell us about them." "My wife Amira has been waiting for me for 6 years. She's raised our 3 children largely alone during my incarceration. My oldest daughter Maya is now 20 years old and in her 2nd year of nursing school. My son Omar is 17 and about to graduate high school. My youngest daughter Layla is 13 and still draws pictures of her father coming home." His voice cracked slightly on the last words. "They need me, ma'am. Not the soldier I used to be, not the man who made mistakes with other people's money, but the husband and father I'm trying to become. I can't undo what I've done, but I can spend the rest of my life making it right." The room was silent for a long moment. Then the chairwoman nodded. "Mr. Morrison, this board has reviewed your case extensively. We've spoken with prison staff, federal agents, and counselors who have worked with you during your incarceration. The consensus is remarkable in its unanimity." She paused. "Everyone who has encountered you believes you are genuinely reformed." Khalid held his breath. "However, the nature of your crimes and the violence in your record cannot be ignored entirely. We have a responsibility to the public to ensure that anyone we release poses no threat to society." "I understand." "Do you? Because what I see in your file is a man who is capable of extreme violence when provoked. A man who was trained by the United States military to be a weapon." She leaned forward. "How do we know that weapon won't be unleashed again once you're back in the world?" Khalid considered the question carefully before answering. "You don't," he said finally. "You can't. No amount of good behavior or rehabilitation programs can guarantee that I will never face a situation where violence becomes necessary. What I can tell you is that I have spent the last 6 years learning to be something other than a weapon. I have found faith, community, and purpose. I have a family that loves me and needs me. I have every reason to choose peace and no reason to choose war." He paused. "But I won't lie to you. If someone threatens my family, if someone puts my wife or children in danger, I will protect them with everything I have. That's not the weapon talking. That's the father, the husband, the man who loves his family more than his own life." The chairwoman studied him for a long moment. Then unexpectedly she smiled. "That may be the most honest answer any applicant has ever given this board." She turned to her colleagues. "All in favor of granting parole?" 4 hands rose. "All opposed? None. Mr. Morrison, your parole is granted. You will be released in 30 days pending completion of final paperwork and transition planning. Congratulations." Khalid closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. 6 years. It was finally over. The news spread through Stonegate within hours. Inmates he had helped over the years came to congratulate him, their faces showing genuine happiness at his good fortune. Guards who had watched his transformation nodded with respect as he passed. Even the new power players who controlled the blocks sent word that they wished him well. But the most unexpected visitor came on his final night. Crusher. The giant man had been released from the infirmary 2 years after their shower room battle, his body healed but his spirit broken by the defeat that had stripped away his reputation as an unbeatable enforcer. He had spent the intervening years in quiet isolation, a shell of the terrifying presence he had once been. Now he stood at the entrance to Khalid's cell, his massive frame filling the doorway. "Morrison, got a minute?" Khalid looked up from the Quran he had been reading. "Crusher, I wasn't expecting you." "Nobody ever does." The giant shifted uncomfortably. "Can I come in?" "Of course." Crusher ducked through the doorway and lowered himself onto Kevin's old bunk, which groaned under his weight. For a long moment, neither man spoke. "I heard you're getting out tomorrow," Crusher finally said. "That's right." "Good, that's good." The giant's hands twisted together nervously. I needed to say something before you leave. Been thinking about it for years, actually, just never had the guts to do it." "Say what you need to say." Crusher took a deep breath. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between them. "For what Tank hired me to do, for what I tried to do to you in that shower room, for all of it." Crusher's voice was rough with emotion. "I was a different man then. A man who thought violence was all he had to offer the world. You showed me I was wrong." Khalid studied the giant's face, searching for signs of deception. He found none. "How did I show you that?" "By not killing me." Crusher laughed bitterly. "You had me in that chokehold. You could have held it for another 10 seconds and I would have been dead. Brain damage at minimum. But you didn't. You let me go the moment I stopped being a threat. You submitted. The fight was over. That's exactly what I mean." Crusher leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Every other fighter I've ever known would have finished me, sent a message, made sure I never came back for revenge. But you just let me go and walked away, like my life actually mattered to you." "Every life matters." "See, that's the thing. I never believed that before. To me, people were either useful or in the way. But watching you over these years, watching how you treat everyone with respect even when they don't deserve it," Crusher shook his head slowly. "It made me think maybe I could be different too." "And are you different?" "I'm trying. Started going to Father Miguel's services. Been reading books, learning things I never cared about before. Got my GED last month." A ghost of pride crossed Crusher's face. First diploma I've ever earned. First accomplishment that didn't involve hurting somebody. Khalid felt something warm spread through his chest. This man had been sent to kill him. This man had wrapped his arms around Khalid's chest and tried to squeeze the life from his body. And now he was sitting here talking about education and faith and the possibility of redemption. "I'm proud of you," Khalid said quietly. Crusher looked up, startled. "You mean that?" "I do. Change is the hardest thing any person can do. It requires admitting that who you were wasn't good enough and committing to become something better. The fact that you're doing that work means you're already further along than most people ever get." Crusher was quiet for a moment. "What do you do when you get out?" he asked finally. "After everything that's happened, all the violence and the fear and the anger, how do you go back to being a normal person?" "I don't know," Khalid admitted. "I've been asking myself that question for 6 years. The only answer I've found is that you take it one day at a time, one choice at a time. You wake up every morning and decide to be the person you want to be, not the person you used to be. And if you fail, if the old you comes back, then you get up the next morning and try again. Redemption isn't a destination, Crusher. It's a journey. The only way to fail is to stop walking." Crusher nodded, slowly absorbing the words. "I hope I see you again someday," he said. "On the outside, I mean, when I finally get out of here. When you do come find me, we'll share a meal and talk about how far we've both come." The giant smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his scarred face into something almost gentle. "I'd like that." He rose and extended his hand. Khalid shook it. Then Crusher was gone, and Khalid was alone with his thoughts for the last night of his incarceration. Morning came too slowly and too quickly at the same time. Khalid performed his Fajr prayer as the first light crept through the crack in his window, his heart racing with anticipation and fear. In a few hours, he would walk through the gates of Stonegate Federal Prison as a free man. In a few hours, he would see his family for the first time in 6 years without bulletproof glass between them. In a few hours, everything would change. The processing took 2 hours. Paperwork and signatures and final instructions about parole conditions and reporting requirements. Khalid listened to all of it with half his attention, the other half focused entirely on the moment that was approaching. Then they led him to the final gate. Beyond it, waiting in the visitor parking lot, he could see a car he recognized, and standing beside it, 4 figures that made his heart stop beating. Amira, Maya, Omar, Layla, they were all there, all waiting, all watching as the gate slowly swung open and Khalid Morrison took his first steps as a free man in 6 years. Layla broke first. Baba? She sprinted across the parking lot with the abandon of a 13-year-old who had spent half her life waiting for this moment. Khalid barely had time to brace himself before she slammed into his chest, her arms wrapping around him with strength that seemed impossible for someone so small. "You're home," she sobbed into his chest. "You're finally home." "I'm home, my little star. I'm home." The others followed more slowly, giving him a moment with his youngest before joining the embrace. Maya beautiful and grown now, tears streaming down her face, Omar tall and serious, trying to maintain composure but failing, and Amira his anchor, his heart, his reason for surviving. She took his face in her hands and looked into his eyes. "I knew you would come back to us. I promised. You always keep your promises." She kissed him then, soft and fierce at the same time, 6 years of longing compressed into a single moment that seemed to stop time itself. When they finally separated, Khalid looked at his family with eyes that blurred with tears he no longer tried to hide. "Let's go home." The drive to Detroit took 14 hours. 14 hours of conversation that never seemed to run out. 14 hours of catching up on 6 years of missed moments and milestones. 14 hours of laughter and tears and the simple joy of being together. Maya talked about nursing school, about her dream of working in pediatric oncology, about the patients she had already met during her clinical rotations. Omar talked about his college applications, about the scholarship offers he had received, about the engineering programs he was considering. Layla talked about everything at once, bouncing from topic to topic with the boundless energy of adolescence. And Amira drove her hand, occasionally finding Khalid's across the center console as if she needed to confirm that he was really there. "The house is different, she warned him as they crossed the Michigan border. "I did some renovations while you were away. Added a home office so I could work from home when the kids were young. Updated the kitchen, planted a garden in the backyard. I can't wait to see it. It's still your home, Khalid. It always has been. I needed to keep busy, to have projects, to have something to focus on besides missing you. I understand. Do you..." She glanced at him, her eyes searching. "I was so angry at you for so long. Angry that you made those choices. Angry that you left me alone to raise 3 children. Angry that you weren't there for birthdays and holidays and all the moments that mattered. You had every right to be angry. Maybe, but then I would remember the man you were, the man you are, and the anger would fade and all that was left was love." Her voice caught. "I never stopped loving you, Khalid, not for one single day. I never stopped loving you either. You were with me in every prayer, every thought, every dream. You kept me alive in there." They pulled into the driveway of their home just as the sun was setting. Khalid stepped out of the car and looked at the house he had last seen 6 years ago when FBI agents had led him away in handcuffs. It was different now, as Amira had warned. New paint, new landscaping, a porch swing that hadn't been there before. But it was still his home. He could feel it in his bones. "Welcome back, Baba." Layla took his hand and led him toward the front door. "I want to show you my room. I redecorated it 3 times since you left. It's purple now, but I might change it to blue. I want to see everything." The door opened and Khalid Morrison crossed the threshold into a life he had dreamed of for 6 years. He was finally home. The first month was harder than anyone had expected. Khalid struggled to sleep in a bed that felt too soft after years on a prison mattress. He flinched at sudden noises and found himself automatically scanning rooms for threats that didn't exist. He had trouble making decisions, his mind so conditioned to following prison routines that the freedom of normal life felt overwhelming. Amira was patient. "It takes time," she told him one night when he couldn't sleep. "You spent 6 years in survival mode. Your brain doesn't know how to turn that off yet. What if it never does? What if I'm too broken to be the husband you need? Then we'll be broken together." She pulled him close. "I didn't wait 6 years for perfection, Khalid. I waited for you, exactly as you are. And we'll figure out the rest as we go." Slowly, painfully, he began to heal. He found a job teaching self-defense at a community center in downtown Detroit. The work gave him purpose and allowed him to use his skills in positive ways. He taught young men and women from difficult backgrounds how to protect themselves without becoming predators. He showed them that strength wasn't about domination, but about discipline and control. He started leading Friday prayers at a small mosque near their home, sharing lessons he had learned about faith and redemption with people who needed to hear them. He spoke about his experiences in prison without shame, letting others see that even the worst mistakes could lead to transformation, and he spent time with his children. Real time. Present time. The kind of time he had missed for 6 years and would never take for granted again. He helped Maya study for her nursing exams, quizzing her on medications and procedures until she knew them by heart. He attended Omar's football games, cheering from the stands like he had never been away. He sat with Layla while she did homework, answering questions about math and history and the mysteries of the universe. One evening, Omar asked the question that Khalid had been waiting for. "Dad, what was it really like in prison? I mean, you've never really talked about it." They were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "It was hard," Khalid said honestly, "harder than anything I'd done in the military. Because in the military, I had purpose. I knew why I was fighting and what I was fighting for. In prison, the only purpose was survival, and some days survival didn't feel like enough." "But you did survive. More than that. Mom says you became some kind of legend in there." Khalid smiled slightly. "I became someone who refused to break, that's all. I held on to my faith and my love for this family, and I didn't let anyone take those things away from me." "The guy who threatened us, Tank, what happened to him?" "He's still in prison. He'll probably die there. The last I heard, he lost all his power and spends his days alone, forgotten by the people who used to fear him." "Good." Omar's voice was hard. "He deserved worse." "Maybe, but that's not for us to decide. We do our best to live good lives and let God handle the judgment of others." Omar was quiet for a moment. "I want to be like you, Dad, strong enough to protect my family, but wise enough to know when fighting isn't the answer." Khalid felt tears prick his eyes. "You already are, son. You already are." 2 years later, Kevin Wright came to visit. He arrived on a Sunday afternoon, driving a car that was old but well-maintained, wearing clothes that were simple but clean. The nervous young man who had shared a cell with Khalid in Stonegate was gone, replaced by someone who stood straighter and spoke with confidence. "I found you," Kevin said, grinning. "Took me a while, but I found you." "You look good, Kevin. You look healthy." "I am. Working at a youth center now, helping kids who remind me of myself. Kids who made mistakes and need someone to believe they can change." He laughed. "Sound familiar?" "Very familiar." "Gee?" They sat on the porch and talked for hours, catching up on years of separate lives. Kevin had earned a degree in social work. He had gotten married to a woman he met at his job. He was expecting his first child in 3 months. "I wanted you to know," Kevin said as the afternoon faded toward evening. "Everything good in my life started because you treated me like I mattered. You showed me that I could be more than my worst mistake. Without you, I would probably be dead or back in prison. Instead, I'm about to be a father." Khalid felt the weight of those words settle over him like a blessing. "I'm proud of you, Kevin." "I know. That's what makes it mean so much." Kevin stood and extended his hand. "Thank you, Khalid, for everything. Go home to your wife. Be the man she deserves." "I will. I promise." Kevin drove away into the gathering dusk, leaving Khalid alone with the realization that his suffering had not been meaningless after all. The day Layla graduated from high school, 8 years after Khalid's release from prison, the entire family gathered for a celebration that felt like the culmination of everything they had survived. Maya came with her husband, a fellow nurse she had met during her residency, and their 2-year-old daughter, who called Khalid Jiddo, with a toddler's approximation of the Arabic word for grandfather. Omar came with his fiancée, a chemical engineer, who challenged him intellectually and made him laugh in ways the family had never seen. And Layla, 18 years old now, stood before them, in her graduation gown, with a smile that could light up the darkest room. "I want to say something," she announced, raising her glass of sparkling cider. "A toast." The family fell silent. "When I was 7 years old, my father went away. I didn't understand why. I didn't understand what he had done or what was happening to him. All I knew was that Baba wasn't there anymore, and I missed him more than I knew how to say." Her voice wavered, but did not break. "For 6 years, I drew pictures of him coming home. I imagined what it would be like to hug him again. I prayed every night that God would keep him safe and bring him back to us." She looked at Khalid with eyes that shone with tears. "And then he came home. And he was different. Quieter. Sadder. Carrying weight that I couldn't see but could feel. But he was still my Baba. Still the man who taught me to be strong and kind and faithful. Still the man who showed me that mistakes don't define us. Our choices after those mistakes do. She raised her glass higher. To my father, Khalid Morrison, the strongest, bravest, most loving man I know. Thank you for coming home. Thank you for fighting to become the man you are. Thank you for showing all of us what redemption really looks like. To Khalid. The family echoed, glasses raised. Khalid stood and embraced his youngest daughter, holding her close as the tears finally fell. I love you, Baba, Layla whispered. I love you more than you will ever know. That night, after the guests had gone and the children had returned to their own lives, Khalid and Amira sat together on their back porch, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Are you happy? Amira asked quietly. Khalid considered the question carefully, as he had considered every important question since his return from prison. I am content, he said finally. I have a family that loves me, work that gives me purpose, faith that sustains me through difficult days. That is more than I ever expected to have after everything I've done. That's not the same as happy. No, it's not. He took her hand in his. But I think true happiness is something you build over time, not something you find in a single moment. And I'm building it. Every day, every choice, every prayer. Amira leaned her head against his shoulder. I'm glad you came home, Khalid. I'm glad I had a home to come back to. They sat together in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them, two people who had survived separation and fear and the worst that humanity could offer, and had emerged on the other side with their love intact. Khalid thought about all the men he had known in Stonegate, the broken ones and the redeemed ones. Tank, who had chosen hatred and lost everything. Crusher, who had chosen change and found something better. Kevin, who had chosen hope and built a life worth living. And himself, a man who had been many things. Soldier, killer, prisoner, father, husband, leader. A man who had learned that strength was not about violence, but about the courage to keep walking forward even when the path was dark. A man who had discovered that redemption was not a destination, but a daily choice made over and over again until it became as natural as breathing. Somewhere in the distance, a mosque called the faithful to prayer, the ancient words drifting through the night air like a blessing. Khalid closed his eyes and listened. He had spent 12 years learning to be a weapon. He had spent 6 years learning to be a survivor. And he had spent the rest of his life learning to be a man. The quiet Muslim who had refused to break, who had stood alone against impossible odds, who had chosen faith over fear and family over pride, had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Peace, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. Not the end of conflict, but the beginning of wisdom. Not the silence of surrender, but the stillness of a soul that had finally come home. Khalid Morrison opened his eyes, looked up at the stars and smiled. The war was over. The warrior had become a man, and the man had become something greater than he had ever imagined possible. A father, a husband, a teacher, a believer. A living testament to the truth that no matter how far you fall, no matter how dark the night becomes, there is always a path back to the light. You just have to keep walking.